Chapter 1. The Escape from Privet Drive. Harry Potter had always known that green was a dangerous colour. Not the green of grass or leaves, or even the sickly green of Brussels sprouts that Aunt Petunia forced down his throat when she remembered to feed him at all. No, this was the particular shade of green that Dudley's hair had turned 3 hours ago during the Dursleys' neighbourhood barbecue, and it was the kind of green that made Uncle Vernon's face go purple with rage. The cupboard under the stairs had never felt smaller. Harry pressed himself against the back wall, knees drawn up to his chest, listening to the muffled sounds of the party continuing outside. Laughter drifted through the thin walls, the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs on the patio stones. Mrs. Figg from next door was telling someone about her cats again. Mr. Mason from Vernon's work was bragging about his new car. None of them knew that the Dursley boy was locked in the upstairs bathroom, frantically scrubbing at hair that refused to return to its natural blonde, no matter how much shampoo Petunia applied. Harry hadn't meant for it to happen. He never meant for any of it to happen. He'd been serving drinks, keeping his head down, trying to be invisible the way the Dursleys preferred. Dudley had been showing off for his friends, talking loudly about how he was going to beat up some kid at school when term started again. "Just like I do with my freak cousin," he'd said, loud enough for half the street to hear, and then he'd shoved Harry hard enough to send him stumbling into the beverage table. That should have been the end of it. A simple stumble, maybe some spilled lemonade, another reason for Vernon to shout at him later. But Dudley hadn't been satisfied with just the push. He'd grabbed Harry's arm and twisted it behind his back, the way he'd learned from watching action movies, and hissed in his ear, "Tell them what you are, freak. Tell them you're a waste of space." The pain had been sharp and familiar, but something else had built beneath it. A pressure in Harry's chest, a heat that had nothing to do with the summer sun. He'd looked up at Dudley's smirking face, at the circle of neighbourhood kids laughing at his humiliation, at the adults who noticed but chose to look away, because criticising Vernon Dursley's parenting wasn't worth the social awkwardness. And then Dudley's hair had turned the colour of fresh spring grass. The screaming had started immediately. Not from Dudley, he'd been too shocked to make a sound at first, but from Aunt Petunia, who'd dropped her plate of finger sandwiches and rushed to her precious son as if he'd been set on fire. The other children had pointed and laughed until their parents shushed them, sudden worry creeping into their voices. Vernon had gone very still for exactly 3 seconds before exploding into motion, grabbing Harry by the collar and dragging him into the house while making loud excuses about pranks and washable hair dye. "Temporary nonsense," Vernon had boomed to their guests, his sales smile stretched so wide it looked painful. "Boys will be boys, you know how it is. Dudley's always getting into his mother's beauty supplies." But Harry had seen the fear in his uncle's eyes, the same fear that appeared whenever something unexplainable happened around Harry, whenever plates jumped from his hands or his hair grew back overnight after Petunia's attempts to cut it. Vernon knew this wasn't hair dye or pranks or any other normal explanation he could offer to their neighbours. The cupboard door had slammed shut behind him with enough force to rattle the coat hangers, and Vernon's voice had been low and deadly through the wood. 3 days. No food, no water, no toilet breaks. You'll learn to control your freakishness if I have to starve it out of you." That had been 3 days ago. Harry's stomach had stopped growling sometime yesterday. The thirst was worse now, a constant ache in his throat that made swallowing painful. He could hear Petunia in the kitchen, preparing another elaborate meal for their still ongoing stream of visitors. The smell of roast beef and Yorkshire pudding drifted under the door, making his mouth water despite himself. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened to their voices. "Still hasn't come out completely," Petunia was saying, probably to Mrs. Polkiss from down the street. "We've tried everything. I'm thinking we might have to cut it all off and let it grow back." These modern children, Mrs. Polkiss replied with a sking sound, always getting into mischief. At least your Dudley's a normal boy, not like some of these strange ones you hear about. If only she knew, Harry thought bitterly. If only any of them knew what normal really meant in the Dursley household. A new voice joined the conversation. Mr. Mason, Vernon's colleague, who Vernon was always trying to impress. Dursley, that nephew of yours, the thin one. Haven't seen him around today. He's not ill, is he? Harry held his breath. Oh, he's fine. Vernon's voice boomed, just a bit too loud, too hearty. Sent him to stay with his other relatives for a few days. You know how it is with family obligations. Other relatives. As if Harry had any relatives besides the Dursleys who would claim him. As if there was anywhere else in the world he belonged. The conversation moved on to safer topics. Work, weather, the state of the neighborhood. Harry let his head fall back against the wall and closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids was different from the darkness of the cupboard, warmer somehow, though that might have been the fever starting to set in. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, heavy footsteps were stomping through the house, and Vernon's voice was getting louder as he approached the cupboard. Absolutely not having this conversation at my barbecue, Mason. The boy is my responsibility, and I'll handle him as I see fit. I'm just saying, came Mr. Mason's reply, closer now. 3 days seems excessive for a bit of hair dye mischief. Social services would have something to say about. The footsteps stopped directly outside Harry's door. Social services, Vernon repeated, and his voice had gone very quiet. That was never a good sign. Social services won't be saying anything about anything, Mason, because there's nothing to say. Boys need firm discipline. That's what's wrong with children today. Too much coddling, not enough consequences. Vernon, Petunia's voice, sharp with warning. Perhaps we should... No. Vernon's voice was getting louder again. No, I think it's time our house guest learned exactly what happens to freaks who embarrass this family in front of our neighbors. The lock clicked. Harry scrambled backward as the door swung open, but there was nowhere to go in the tiny space. Vernon's bulk filled the doorway, blocking out most of the light from the hallway. Behind him, Harry could see Mr. Mason's concerned face and Aunt Petunia wringing her hands. "Get out," Vernon said quietly. Harry didn't move. He'd learned that sometimes staying still was the safer option, that sometimes Vernon's rage burned itself out if he couldn't find a target to focus on. "I said, get out!" Vernon's hand shot forward and grabbed Harry's arm, hauling him upright. Harry's legs buckled. 3 days without food or water had left him weaker than he'd realized, but Vernon's grip held him upright. "Time you learned what happens to freaks who can't control themselves." Mr. Mason stepped forward. "Now see here, Dursley. Stay out of this, Mason." Vernon's grip tightened on Harry's arm, tight enough to bruise. "This is between me and the boy. He's just a child. He's a freak!" The words came out as a snarl, and Vernon's other hand rose, forming a fist. "And freaks need to be taught their place." Harry saw the blow coming and tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. Vernon's fist connected with the side of his head, hard enough to send stars exploding across his vision. He hit the wall of the cupboard and slid down, tasting copper where he'd bitten his tongue. The pressure in his chest was building again, that same heat and energy that had turned Dudley's hair green. But this time, it felt bigger, more dangerous. This time it felt like it might tear him apart from the inside. "Vernon, stop." Petunia's voice was shrill with panic. "The neighbors will hear." "Let them hear." Vernon raised his fist again. "Let them all hear what happens when you embarrass the Dursley family name." The second blow never landed. The heat in Harry's chest exploded outward like a bomb going off, and suddenly the world was spinning. The cupboard walls dissolved around him. The sound of Vernon's shouting faded to nothing, and Harry felt like he was being pulled through a very long, very dark tunnel at impossible speed. And then, with a crash that knocked all the air from his lungs, he hit solid marble floor. Harry lay there for a long moment, stunned and gasping. The air tasted different here, cooler, cleaner, with a strange metallic tang that made his nose itch. Slowly, carefully, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees and looked around. He was in the most magnificent hall he had ever seen. The ceiling soared high above his head, supported by gleaming white columns that seemed to stretch on forever. The floor beneath him was polished marble, so smooth and perfect that he could see his reflection staring back up at him. A thin, bruised boy with wild black hair and broken glasses, wearing clothes 3 sizes too big and stained with 3 days' worth of dirt. But it wasn't the grandeur of the hall that made his breath catch in his throat. It was the creatures. They were small, no taller than Harry himself, but there was nothing childlike about them. Their skin was pale and seemed almost translucent in the strange, sourceless light that filled the hall. Their fingers were long and thin, ending in what looked like claws, and their eyes were black as coal and far too intelligent. They wore strange clothes, formal jackets and trousers, but cut in styles that seemed both ancient and completely foreign, and they were all staring at him. One of them stepped forward, and Harry instinctively scrambled backward until his shoulders hit something solid. He turned his head and saw another white column rising behind him, which meant he was trapped between the marble pillar and the advancing creature. The creature spoke, and its voice was unlike anything Harry had ever heard. It was sharp and guttural, full of clicks and sounds that didn't seem like they should come from a throat at all. The language was completely foreign, but somehow Harry got the impression it was asking a question. I don't understand," Harry whispered, his voice cracking from disuse and thirst. "I don't know what you're saying." The creature tilted its head, studying him with those 2 black eyes. Then it spoke again, and this time the words were English, though heavily accented and strangely pronounced. "You are the Potter heir." It wasn't a question. Harry blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "The Potter heir," the creature repeated, moving closer. "You carry the blood, the magic signature." And the scar. Its gaze fixed on Harry's forehead, where a thin line of lighter skin cut through his eyebrow, a scar he'd had for as long as he could remember, which the Dursleys claimed came from the car crash that killed his parents. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Harry said, trying to edge around the column. "My name is Harry. Harry Dursley. I'm nobody special. I'm just—" "You are Harry James Potter," the creature interrupted, and its voice carried absolute certainty. "Son of James Potter and Lily Evans Potter, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, and you have triggered the emergency protections of your bloodline." Harry's world tilted sideways. Not Dursley. Potter. And parents with names that weren't just vague mentions of your father and mother from Aunt Petunia's tight-lipped explanations. "Lord Potter," the creature continued, and there was something that might have been respect in its voice. "Welcome to Gringotts." Chapter 2. The Goblin's Revelation. Harry stared at the creature. The goblin, his mind corrected, though he had no idea where that word had come from. It felt right somehow, like a half-remembered dream, surfacing in daylight. "Gringotts," he repeated slowly, tasting the unfamiliar word. It meant nothing to him, but the way the goblin said it suggested it should mean everything. What is Gringotts? The goblin's dark eyes widened slightly, as if Harry had asked what breathing was for. Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Lord Potter, the oldest and most secure magical banking institution in Britain. Your family has held accounts here since the 12th century. Magical? Banking? 12th century. 12th? Harry's head was spinning, and not just from hunger and dehydration. I think there's been a mistake. I'm not a lord of anything. I'm just Harry. I live with my aunt and uncle, and they— He stopped, because what could he say? That they locked him in cupboards and forgot to feed him. That they told him his parents died in a car crash because they were drunk and worthless? Your guardians, the goblin said, and there was something cold in his voice now, are muggles, non-magical humans. They were never meant to raise the Potter heir. My parents died in a car crash, Harry said quickly, clinging to the one solid fact the Dursleys had given him. When I was a baby, Aunt Petunia said they were drunk, and your parents were murdered. The words hit Harry like a physical blow. The marble floor beneath him seemed to tilt and sway, and he had to grip the column behind him to keep from falling. What? James and Lily Potter were murdered on the night of October 31st, 1981. The goblin continued, his voice gentle now but implacable. You were 15 months old. You survived. But you were scarred. He gestured toward Harry's forehead. That mark is not from any car crash, young lord. It is the result of a killing curse that should have ended your life. Harry's hand flew to his forehead, tracing the thin line of scar tissue he'd carried for as long as he could remember. The Dursleys had always told him it was from the crash, from flying glass or twisted metal. They'd made it sound shameful, like proof of his parents' carelessness and failure. I don't understand. His voice came out as a whisper. If that's true, then why did the Dursleys? Why would they lie to me? Because, Lord Potter, the truth is dangerous. Your parents died fighting a dark wizard, a man so feared that most of our kind still refuse to speak his name. That you survived his attack made you famous throughout the magical world. The Dursleys, I suspect, wanted no part of that fame or the dangers that might come with it. Harry slumped against the column, his legs finally giving out entirely. The cool marble against his back was the only thing that felt real in a world that had just turned completely upside down. My name, the goblin said, settling into what looked like a slight bow, is Griphook. I am your family's account manager, as my father was before me, and his father before him. The Potter family has banked with Gringotts for 800 years, Lord Potter. I am honored to finally meet you. 800 years? Harry's voice cracked. But that's impossible. The Dursleys said we didn't have any money, that they were taking care of me out of kindness, that I was a burden. Griphook's expression darkened. The Potter family, young lord, is one of the wealthiest in magical Britain. Your parents left you an inheritance that most wizards could not spend in 10 lifetimes. The hall around them seemed to spin. Harry closed his eyes, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Wealth, magic, murder, parents who died, heroes instead of drunken failures. It was too much to process, too different from everything he'd been told about himself and his place in the world. I need to see, he whispered. See, my lord? The vaults, the money. I need to see it's real. Griphook studied him for a long moment, those black eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. Of course. But first you need sustenance. You are unwell, Lord Potter. When did you last eat? Harry tried to remember. 3 days ago, I think. Maybe 4. The goblin's jaw tightened. And water? The same. For a moment, Griphook's composed expression cracked, revealing something that looked like fury. This is how your guardians treat the Potter heir? This is how they honor the trust placed in them? They don't know, Harry said quickly, some instinct making him defend the Dursleys even as his body ached from Vernon's treatment. They don't know about any of this. They think I'm just a burden. Yes, you said. Griphook's voice was sharp. They think the Potter heir, the child who defeated the darkest wizard in centuries, is a burden to be starved and beaten. How did you know about? Your injuries are obvious to anyone who looks, Lord Potter. We goblins are not blind. Griphook stood, brushing dust from his formal jacket. Come. We will get you food and clean clothes, and then I will show you your inheritance. But first you must understand what that inheritance means. He began walking deeper into the hall, his footsteps echoing off the marble walls. Harry scrambled to follow, his legs shaky but holding his weight. The Potter family, Griphook said as they walked, is what we call a most ancient and noble house. Do you know what that means? Harry shook his head. It means your bloodline can be traced back over 1,000 years. It means your ancestors helped found the very structures of magical Britain, its laws, its government, its economy. The Potter family has produced ministers for magic, supreme mugwumps, chief warlocks of the Wizengamot. Your great-great-grandfather helped establish the statute of secrecy that keeps our world hidden from the Muggle one. They passed through an archway into a smaller chamber, where Griphook gestured for Harry to sit in a chair that was clearly sized for someone much taller. A snap of the goblin's fingers brought another goblin carrying a tray of food. Bread, cheese, some kind of soup that smelled like heaven to Harry's empty stomach. Eat slowly, Griphook advised as Harry reached for the bread with shaking hands. Your stomach needs time to adjust. Harry forced himself to take small bites, though every instinct screamed at him to devour everything in sight. The bread was softer and more flavorful than anything Aunt Petunia had ever served him. The cheese was rich and creamy. The soup tasted like it had actual meat in it, not just the thin broth he sometimes got when he was sick. Your father, James Potter, inherited his lordship at the age of 16 when his parents died of dragon pox. Griphook continued, settling into a chair across from Harry. By that time, the Potter family holdings included 7 bank vaults, estates in 3 countries, controlling interests in 15 major magical businesses, and a seat on the Wizengamot, our magical government's high court. Harry nearly choked on his soup. 15 businesses. Potions ingredients, magical transportation, publishing, and property development, among others. Your great-grandfather Fleamont made the family fortune even larger by developing several revolutionary potions, including Sleekeasy's hair potion. Hair potion? Indeed. Rather ironic, considering your own hair's tendency toward chaos. Griphook's expression might have been a tempting humor. The royalties alone from that single invention would support most magical families for generations. Harry set down his spoon, staring at the goblin. But if all of that's true, if my family was so important and wealthy, why didn't anyone come for me? Why was I left with the Dursleys? Griphook's expression grew grave. That, Lord Potter, is a question I have been asking myself for nearly 9 years. By the terms of your parents' will, you should have been raised by your godfather, Sirius Black. When he became unavailable, there were several other magical families who would have gladly taken you in. The Longbottoms, the Bones family, even the Weasleys, despite their more modest circumstances. Then why? Because Albus Dumbledore, in his capacity as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, declared that your parents' will was superseded by considerations of your safety. He claimed that blood protection from your mother's sacrifice required you to live with her sister until you reached the age of majority. The name Dumbledore meant nothing to Harry, but Griphook spoke it with something that sounded like barely controlled anger. Blood protection? Ancient magic, triggered by your mother's willing sacrifice to save your life. It can provide powerful wards, but only when you share a home with blood relatives who willingly take you in. Griphook paused meaningfully. Tell me, Lord Potter, would you say the Dursleys took you in willingly? Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about Vernon's fists and Petunia's cold silences and Dudley's casual cruelty. No, they hate me. They've always hated me. Then the protection was meaningless from the start. Dumbledore placed you with people who despised you, who saw you as a burden, who knew nothing of your heritage or the responsibilities that come with it. And meanwhile, your inheritance has sat untouched in our vaults, while he has acted as your magical guardian, making decisions about your estate in your name. Something cold settled in Harry's stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. What kind of decisions? Charitable donations, large ones, to causes that align with Dumbledore's political interests. Griphook's voice was carefully neutral, but Harry caught the disapproval underneath. All perfectly legal under magical law, since he was acting as your guardian. But perhaps not what your parents would have chosen. Harry stared down at his half-empty bowl of soup. How much money has he given away? We will review the accounts in detail when we visit the vaults, but I will say this. The Potter fortune is vast enough that even Dumbledore's generosity has not significantly diminished it. I want to see it. All of it. Griphook nodded. As is your right. You are the Potter heir, Lord Potter. Everything your family built, everything they achieved, everything they owned, it all belongs to you now. The question is, what will you do with it? Harry looked up from his soup to find the goblin watching him intently. There was something in those dark eyes that might have been expectation, or hope, or calculation. I don't know, Harry said honestly. Yesterday I thought I was a freak who lived in a cupboard. Now you're telling me I'm some kind of magical lord with more money than I can imagine. Not some kind of magical lord, Griphook corrected. Lord Potter, head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, heir to 8 centuries of magical tradition and responsibility. There is a difference. What kind of responsibility? That, young lord, is what we will explore when we visit your family vaults. Your inheritance includes more than gold and property. It includes knowledge, obligations, and power that you must learn to wield wisely. Harry finished his soup in silence, his mind reeling. Power, responsibility, wealth beyond imagination. Parents who died as heroes, not failures. A heritage that stretched back centuries instead of ending in a cupboard under the stairs. It was everything he had never dared to dream of, and somehow it terrified him more than Vernon's fists ever had. I'm ready, he said finally, setting down his empty bowl. Show me what it means to be a Potter. Chapter 3. The Potter Legacy Unveiled. The journey to the Potter Vaults began with a ride that Harry would remember for the rest of his life. Griphook led him through a maze of corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly into the depths of the earth. The walls were carved from living rock, lit by torches that burned with flames of impossible colors, blue, green, silver, gold. As they walked deeper, Harry began to hear sounds that made no sense. The distant roar of something that might have been a dragon, the splash of underground rivers, the whisper of wind through caverns that had never seen sunlight. How deep does this go? Harry asked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Gringotts extends nearly to the earth's core, Griphook replied without breaking stride. The deeper vaults are reserved for the oldest families, those with the greatest treasures to protect. The Potter vaults are among the deepest. They stopped at what looked like a solid wall of granite. Griphook pressed his palm against the stone, and Harry watched in wonder as ancient runes blazed to life across the surface. The wall dissolved like mist, revealing a cart that looked like it belonged in a mine rather than a bank. In, Griphook commanded, settling himself at the front of the cart. Harry climbed in, gripping the sides as the cart lurched into motion. What followed was a ride that defied every law of physics Harry had ever observed. The cart plunged down tracks that spiraled through caverns filled with waterfalls of liquid starlight, past underground lakes that reflected no light at all, around corners so sharp that Harry was certain they would tip over, only to find the cart somehow staying perfectly balanced. "The first vault," Griphook called over the rush of wind, "contains your liquid assets, gold, silver, precious stones accumulated over 8 centuries. The cart slowed as they approached a massive bronze door set into the cavern wall. Unlike the simple key-locked doors Harry had imagined, this one was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. Griphook placed both hands on the door and spoke a single word in gobbledygook. The door swung open with a sound like thunder. Harry stepped inside and immediately understood why people spoke of Potter wealth in hushed tones. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Mountains of gold coins rose like gleaming hills across the floor, interspersed with chests overflowing with precious gems. Silver ingots were stacked in neat pyramids along the walls. Ancient treasures, goblets, jewelry, weapons, artifacts Harry couldn't even identify, glittered from every surface. "This is just the monetary vault," Griphook said calmly, as if rooms full of treasure were perfectly ordinary. "Your parents accessed this one regularly for household expenses and charitable donations." Harry walked deeper into the vault, his footsteps muffled by gold coins that crunched underfoot. Near the back wall, he found a small table with an ornate ledger open upon it. The pages were covered in neat handwriting that made his chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. "Your father's hand," Griphook observed, following Harry's gaze. "He kept meticulous records of every withdrawal, every donation, every investment. The Potter family has always taken their financial responsibilities seriously." Harry touched the page lightly, tracing letters that formed words like St. Mungo's Hospital, War Orphan Fund, and Hogwarts School, Scholarship Endowment. Even the amounts listed next to them were staggering. "They gave away a lot," he said quietly. "The Potter family motto," Griphook said, "is prodesse quam conspici, to be useful rather than conspicuous. Your ancestors believed that great wealth came with great responsibility." They spent nearly an hour in the monetary vault, with Griphook explaining the various types of magical currency, the investment portfolios, and the business partnerships that generated ongoing income. Harry's head was spinning with numbers that seemed to have too many zeros. But one thing was becoming clear. The Potter family hadn't just been wealthy. They had been foundational to the magical economy. "The second vault," Griphook announced as they climbed back into the cart, "contains your properties and business holdings." This vault was different. Instead of treasure, it contained endless filing cabinets and a large table covered with maps, deeds, and contracts. Griphook began pulling out documents, spreading them across the table with practiced efficiency. "Potter Manor in Godric's Hollow, of course," he said, indicating a detailed property map. "But also Potter Castle in Scotland, which has been in your family since the 14th century. A townhouse in magical London. Estates in Ireland, Wales and France. Holiday homes in Italy and Greece." Harry stared at the maps, trying to process the idea that he owned castles and manors in countries he'd never even visited. "The business holdings are more complex," Griphook continued, pulling out thick ledgers. "Your great-grandfather Fleamont made several brilliant investments. 40% ownership in Quality Quidditch Supplies, 25% in Flourish and Blots Publishing, controlling interest in 3 major potion ingredient suppliers, and substantial holdings in magical transportation." "What's Quidditch?" Griphook paused, looking at Harry with something that might have been pity. "The most popular sport in the magical world, played on flying broomsticks." Flying broomsticks. Harry added that to the growing list of impossible things he was apparently expected to accept as normal. "Your family also owns the Daily Prophet." "What's that?" "Our primary magical newspaper. Your great-great-grandfather purchased it in 1883 when the previous owners faced bankruptcy. It has been a Potter holding ever since." Harry picked up one of the business ledgers, flipping through pages of financial records that documented decades of careful investment and management. The Potter family, he was beginning to understand, hadn't just participated in the magical economy, they had helped shape it. "But this isn't even the most important vault," Griphook said, rolling up the property maps. "Come, there is one more you must see." The third vault was the deepest yet, reached by a cart ride that took them past underground chambers filled with strange magical creatures and pools of water that glowed with their own inner light. When they finally stopped, Harry found himself facing a door that was clearly older than anything he'd seen so far. It was made of black stone carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. No handles, no visible locks, just smooth obsidian covered in runes that seemed to writhe and shift when Harry wasn't looking straight at them. "This vault," Griphook said solemnly, "has been sealed since the night your parents died. It can only be opened by the Potter heir, and only when he comes of age at 17. However, certain items within it can be accessed earlier, under specific circumstances." "What circumstances?" "When the heir's life is in danger. When the family line faces extinction. When the magical world itself is threatened." Griphook's dark eyes fixed on Harry's face. "Your emergency transportation to Gringotts activated one of those protocols. The vault recognizes you as being in mortal peril." The goblin approached the door and spoke a long phrase in gobbledygook. The runes flared with brilliant white light, and a section of the stone dissolved, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Only you can enter," Griphook said. "I will wait here." Harry approached the opening with a mixture of excitement and terror. Beyond the threshold lay darkness so complete it seemed solid. He took a deep breath and stepped through. The moment his feet crossed the threshold, torches blazed to life throughout the chamber, revealing a sight that took his breath away. This wasn't a vault. It was a library. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts that radiated power even Harry could sense. In the center of the room sat a massive desk, carved from what looked like a single piece of amber, and upon it lay an open book bound in midnight blue leather. Harry approached the desk cautiously. The open book's pages were covered in elegant handwriting that shifted and changed even as he watched. At the top of the current page, golden letters spelled out, "The Potter Family Grimoire, a history of service and sacrifice." As he began to read, the words seemed to speak directly into his mind, filling him with knowledge and images that painted a picture of his family's true legacy. Ignotus Potter, 13th century, who helped create the Statute of Secrecy that protected magical people from persecution. Linfred Potter, the Potterer, whose healing potions saved thousands during the plague years. Hardwin Potter, who served as a founding member of the Wizengamot. Henry Potter, who publicly opposed the dark wizard Grindelwald when others remained silent. And finally, James and Lily Potter, who died protecting not just their son, but the future of the magical world itself. "We have always been guardians," Harry whispered, reading words that appeared on the page as if written by an invisible hand. "Not rulers, not conquerors, but protectors of those who cannot protect themselves." He turned the page and found a detailed map of magical Britain, marked with symbols he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Potter properties, Potter businesses, Potter allies, and dependents. Thousands of magical people whose livelihoods depended on Potter family enterprises. Dozens of families who owed their lives to Potter interventions over the centuries. Another page showed him the current state of the magical world, political alliances, economic pressures, threats both visible and hidden, and threaded through it all the subtle influence of Potter resources, Potter connections, Potter responsibilities. He was not just wealthy, Harry realized. He was connected to virtually every aspect of magical British society. The Potter family had spent centuries carefully building a network of influence designed not for personal gain, but for the protection and prosperity of their entire world. And now it all belonged to him. The grimoire's pages fluttered, settling on a section titled Rights and Responsibilities of the Potter Heir. Harry read with growing amazement about seats on the Wizengamot, positions on the boards of governors of magical institutions, traditional alliances with other ancient families, and obligations that stretched back generations. At age 11, he could claim his basic inheritance and begin learning to manage it. At age 14, he could take his seat in the Wizengamot as Lord Potter. At age 17, he would have full access to everything, including knowledge and powers that the grimoire hinted at but did not yet reveal. But with power comes responsibility, Harry read aloud as new words appeared on the page. The Potter family exists to serve, not to rule. We are the guardians in the shadows, the shield between the innocent and those who would harm them. The last page he read contained a message that made his breath catch. To my son, Harry, if you are reading this, then your father and I are gone, and you have found your way home at last. Know that everything we built, everything we achieved, was in service of creating a better world for you to inherit. You are our greatest treasure, our most important legacy. The power of our family is yours to wield. But remember always that true strength lies not in wealth or magic, but in choosing to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. We love you beyond measure, and we trust you to carry our legacy forward with honor. Your loving mother, Lily Potter. Harry's vision blurred as tears he couldn't hold back spilled down his cheeks. He touched the words gently, and for just a moment he could have sworn he felt warmth beneath his fingertips, as if his mother's hand was reaching across death itself to comfort him. When he finally emerged from the vault, Griphook was waiting patiently by the door. "You understand now?" the goblin said. It wasn't a question. "I think so," Harry replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm not just inheriting money and property. I'm inheriting 8 centuries of responsibility. Indeed, and at age 11, you will be able to begin claiming that inheritance legally. Your seats on various boards of governors, your voice in the Wizengamot, your ability to direct the family's charitable trusts and business investments." Harry thought about Vernon's fists, about the cupboard under the stairs, about being called a freak and a burden. Then he thought about his parents' words, about generations of Potters who had chosen service over selfishness. "When I turn 11, he said slowly, "I want to change things. I want to make sure no other magical child grows up the way I did. I want to honor what my family built." Griphook's expression might have been approval. "Then you understand what it truly means to be a Potter, Lord Harry. Your parents would be proud." As they began the long journey back to the surface, Harry's mind was already racing with possibilities. He had 10 months until his 11th birthday, 10 months to prepare for a responsibility greater than anything he'd ever imagined. 10 months to figure out how to become worthy of the Potter name. Chapter 4. Allies in Marble Halls. When they returned to the upper levels of Gringotts, Griphook led Harry not back to the main hall, but to a smaller chamber, lined with polished mahogany and lit by floating orbs of soft golden light. The room felt important in a way that made Harry straighten his shoulders instinctively. "Director Ragnarok wishes to speak with you," Griphook explained, gesturing for Harry to take a seat in one of the high-backed chairs arranged around an ornate conference table. He rarely grants audiences to anyone below the age of majority, but the Potter account is significant. Before Harry could ask what that meant, the door opened and another goblin entered. This one was clearly older than Griphook, his face more deeply lined, and his formal robes bearing intricate gold embroidery. There was an authority in his bearing that reminded Harry uncomfortably of Uncle Vernon. Except where Vernon's authority felt petty and mean, this goblin's presence suggested power that ran bone-deep. "Lord Potter." The goblin's voice was gravelly but not unkind. "I am Ragnarok, director of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. It has been far too long since a Potter sat in this chamber." "Director Ragnarok," Harry replied, trying to remember the polite manners Aunt Petunia had drilled into him for when Vernon's business associates visited. "Thank you for meeting with me." Ragnok's dark eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. "Manners befitting your station." "Good. You will need them in the years to come." He settled into the chair across from Harry, his clawed fingers steepled before him. "Griphook tells me you have seen your inheritance." "Yes, sir. It's overwhelming." "As it should be. The Potter family holdings represent nearly 8% of the total magical economy in Britain. When your father made decisions about Potter investments, the ripple effects were felt from the smallest potion shop in Diagon Alley to the highest levels of the Ministry of Magic." Harry felt a familiar flutter of panic in his chest. "I don't know anything about economics or investments or—" "Peace, young lord." Ragnok raised a hand. "You are 10 years old. No one expects you to understand such complexities immediately. But you must begin to learn, because others have been making those decisions in your name." The goblin director reached into his robes and withdrew a thick ledger bound in dark green leather. He opened it to a page marked with several ribbons and turned it so Harry could see the columns of figures written in neat script. "This is a record of all financial decisions made regarding Potter assets since your parents' death," Ragnok explained. "As your magical guardian, Albus Dumbledore has had the authority to direct your estate's resources as he sees fit." Harry leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. Even with his limited understanding of money, some of the amounts seemed staggering. "Those are all donations." "Indeed, charitable contributions to various causes. The Magical Creatures Rights Foundation, the International Confederation of Wizards Peace Initiative, the Muggle Protection Society. All worthy causes, to be sure." There was something in Ragnok's tone that made Harry look up sharply. But your parents will specifically outline their charitable priorities. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries and Illnesses, Hogwarts School Scholarships for Disadvantaged Students, support for war orphans and widows. Ragnok's clawed finger traced down the ledger page. "These donations represent different priorities entirely." "You mean Professor Dumbledore gave away my money to things my parents wouldn't have supported?" "I mean," Ragnok said carefully, "that Professor Dumbledore has used Potter resources to advance his own political agenda, all perfectly legal under magical law since he holds guardianship authority. But perhaps not in the spirit of your parents' intentions." Harry stared at the ledger, trying to process what he was learning. The numbers were too big to really grasp, but the principle was clear enough. Someone had been spending his inheritance on things his parents never would have chosen, using his family's reputation to support causes they might have opposed. "How much?" he asked quietly. "In total? Approximately 2 million galleons over the past 9 years. Harry's stomach dropped. He had no real concept of how much money that represented, but it sounded like an enormous amount. Is that a lot?" "Put it this way, young lord. 2 million galleons would purchase half of Diagon Alley." The panic was building again, that familiar feeling of being small and powerless in a world controlled by adults who made decisions he didn't understand. "Can I stop him? Can I take back control of my own money?" "At age 11, you will have the right to review and approve all major expenditures," Ragnok replied. "At 14, when you can legally claim your lordship, you will have full control. Until then," he spread his hands in a gesture that might have been sympathy or resignation. "Until then, I'm still just a child who has to do what adults decide for me. Perhaps there are other ways to protect your interests." Harry looked up sharply at the change in Ragnok's tone. "What kind of ways?" The goblin director leaned back in his chair, studying Harry with those dark, intelligent eyes. "Tell me, Lord Potter, what do you know of goblin-wizard relations?" "Nothing," Harry admitted. "Until today, I didn't know goblins existed. Honest, if disappointing. Very well. Ragnok steepled his fingers again. For over 1,000 years, goblins have maintained a position of careful neutrality in wizard politics. We provide banking services to all magical families, regardless of their political affiliations or personal feuds. We do not take sides in wizard wars or wizard politics. That sounds reasonable. It has served us well. But neutrality does not mean we lack opinions, or that we cannot act to protect our own interests. Ragnok's smile revealed sharp teeth. The Potter family has banked with Gringotts for 8 centuries. They have always treated us with respect, honored their contracts, and paid their debts promptly and in full. We have, in return, provided them with services beyond simple banking. What kind of services? Protection, information, advice, access to markets and opportunities that others might not discover. The Potter family has always understood that goblins are not merely their bankers, but their partners in building and maintaining their wealth. Harry thought about that. And you're offering me the same partnership? I'm offering you more than that, Lord Potter. I'm offering you alliance. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Harry was only beginning to grasp. Why? He asked. Why would you want to ally with me specifically? Because, Ragnok said, you are not just another young wizard inheriting his family's gold. You are the Potter heir, holder of one of the most influential positions in magical Britain. And because certain parties have demonstrated that they view your inheritance as a resource to be exploited rather than a trust to be protected. You mean Professor Dumbledore, among others? But Professor Dumbledore is not your only concern, Lord Potter. There are magical families who resent Potter wealth and influence. There are political factions who would prefer to see ancient family powers diminished. There are those who supported the Dark Wizard who killed your parents, and who might not be pleased to learn that you survived and are reclaiming your birthright. A chill ran down Harry's spine. Are you saying I'm in danger? I am saying that power attracts both allies and enemies. The Potter family has accumulated considerable power over the centuries. As you begin to wield that power, you will need to think carefully about who you can trust. Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he asked, what would this alliance mean? What would you expect from me? Nothing you would not offer freely. Continued use of Gringotts for your banking needs, consultation on major financial decisions. Perhaps as you grow older, coordination on matters of mutual interest in the magical economy. Ragnok leaned forward slightly. In return, Gringotts would provide you with protection, information, and advice. We would act as a neutral party to help you navigate the complexities of magical politics, and we would ensure that your assets remain under your control, not subject to the whims of well-meaning guardians. Can you do that? Can you protect my money from Professor Dumbledore? There are contracts we can draft, safeguards we can implement. Nothing that violates magical law, but measures that would require your personal approval for any expenditure above a certain threshold. Ragnok's smile was sharp. Professor Dumbledore may hold guardianship authority, but Potter assets remain Potter property. We can ensure they are treated as such. Harry thought about the 2 million galleons, about his parents' specific wishes being ignored, about the uncomfortable possibility that Professor Dumbledore might not have his best interests at heart. The adult world was more complicated and dangerous than he had ever imagined, full of people who made decisions based on considerations he didn't understand. But here was someone, something, offering to help him navigate that complexity, offering to protect what was his by right. What do I need to do? He asked. Ragnok gestured, and Griphook stepped forward, carrying a scroll of parchment and an ornate quill that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. A simple contract, Ragnok explained, as Griphook unrolled the parchment. Establishing Gringotts as your primary financial advisors and instituting protective measures for your assets. Nothing binding beyond your majority, and nothing that restricts your freedom to make your own choices as you come of age. Harry read through the contract carefully, surprised to find that he could understand most of it, despite the formal language. The terms seemed fair. Gringotts would provide advice and protection in exchange for continued business relationship and consultation on major decisions. There were clauses protecting his right to withdraw from the agreement at any time, and explicit statements that the bank would not act against his interests or without his knowledge. "This seems reasonable," he said finally. "But I have to ask, what do you get out of this? I mean, really get out of it?" Ragnar's laugh was a harsh bark that might have been approval, spoken like a true Potter. "Your great-grandfather asked the same question when we first proposed expanding our relationship beyond simple banking. And the answer? Stability, Lord Potter. The magical economy depends on the ancient families maintaining their wealth and influence. When those families fall or are diminished, it creates chaos that affects everyone. The Potter family has been a stabilizing force for centuries. We have a vested interest in ensuring that continues. And Professor Dumbledore's management threatens that stability? Professor Dumbledore's political activities create volatility, resources directed toward idealistic crusades rather than sound investments, charitable donations that serve political ends rather than genuine need. It may be well-intentioned, but it is not sustainable long-term." Harry nodded slowly. The explanation made sense, and more importantly, it aligned with what he was beginning to understand about his family's approach to their wealth and responsibility. He took the shimmering quill and signed his name at the bottom of the contract. The moment the quill left the parchment, Harry felt something shift in the air around them. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but somehow he knew that he was no longer alone in facing the complexities of his inheritance. "Welcome to the Alliance, Lord Potter," Ragnar said, rolling up the signed contract. "Your first lesson in magical politics is this. Choose your allies carefully, but once chosen, trust them completely. Half measures and hesitation will serve you poorly in the years to come." "I understand." Harry paused, then added, "Thank you for protecting what's mine, for helping me understand what I'm dealing with. It is our pleasure, Lord Potter, and our profit." Ragnar's sharp smile returned. "Never forget that the best alliances serve both parties' interests. Anything else is charity, and charity is rarely sustainable." As Griphook led Harry back toward the main hall of the bank, the goblin offered one final piece of advice. "You have 10 months before your 11th birthday, when you can begin claiming your inheritance legally. Use that time wisely, Lord Potter. Learn about the magical world. Understand the forces and factions that shape it. Begin building relationships with those who can help you achieve your goals." "What goals?" Harry asked. "I don't even know what I want yet, beyond making sure no one else controls what's mine." "Then perhaps that should be your first goal," Griphook replied. "Deciding what kind of lord you want to be, and what kind of legacy you want to leave." As they walked through the marble halls towards the exit, Harry reflected on everything he had learned. In the span of a single day, he had gone from being a powerless, abused child to the heir of one of the most influential families in magical Britain. He had allies now, resources, and the beginning of an understanding of the complex world he was about to enter. But with all of that came responsibilities that felt enormous and sometimes frightening. People depended on Potter money for their livelihoods. The magical economy could be affected by his decisions. There were those who might see him as a threat, and others who would try to use him for their own purposes. 10 months to prepare. 10 months to learn enough to protect himself and honor his family's legacy. Harry Potter walked out of Gringotts that day, with his head held high, but his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. The real work was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Weight of Gold and History. Harry had never spent a night anywhere but Privet Drive. The guest quarters at Gringotts were unlike anything he could have imagined. A comfortable suite deep within the bank's secure levels, with stone walls carved in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the magical lighting. The bed was larger than the Dursleys' entire cupboard under the stairs, piled high with soft quilts that smelled of lavender and safety. But despite his exhaustion, sleep would not come. Instead, Harry sat propped against the headboard with a stack of leather-bound volumes that Griphook had provided, histories of the Potter family, records of their business dealings, accounts of magical Britain's development over the centuries. Each book revealed new layers of complexity to the world he was only beginning to understand. "The Consolidation Wars of 1458, he read aloud to the empty room, his finger tracing the elegant script. During this period of civil conflict between magical factions, the Potter family emerged as neutral arbiters, using their economic influence to broker peace treaties and establish the foundation for what would become the modern Wizengamot." He turned the page and found a detailed map showing Potter holdings during that era. Even in the 15th century, his ancestors had owned vast estates, controlled trade routes, and maintained alliances that stretched across magical Europe. They hadn't just been wealthy, they had been kingmakers, the power behind thrones, the silent architects of magical society's structure. Another book contained financial records that made Harry's head spin. The Potters had funded the construction of St. Mungo's Hospital. They had established the first magical transportation networks. They had bankrolled expeditions to establish magical communities in the Americas, Australia, and India. For centuries, Potter gold had flowed to any cause that promised to strengthen and expand the magical world. But it was the third book that made Harry set down his reading and stare at the carved ceiling, processing implications that felt too large for his 10-year-old mind to fully grasp. Enemies of House Potter, a historical analysis of opposition factions. The book was smaller than the others, but more densely packed with information. It chronicled 8 centuries of families and individuals who had opposed Potter influence, who had resented Potter wealth, who had seen the family's power as a threat to their own ambitions. The Malfoy family appeared frequently in its pages. Harry read with growing fascination about a centuries-long pattern of conflict between the Potters and Malfoys. Where the Potters invested in innovation and expansion, the Malfoys favored tradition and consolidation. Where the Potters supported progressive magical legislation, the Malfoys championed conservative resistance. Where the Potters used their wealth to create opportunity for others, the Malfoys used theirs to maintain existing hierarchies. The philosophical divide runs deeper than simple business competition, one passage explained. The Malfoy family represents old magical nobility's belief in blood purity and inherited privilege, while the Potter family has consistently championed merit-based advancement and inclusion of Muggle-born wizards in magical society. Harry thought about that. His mother had been Muggle-born, according to what Griphook had told him. Lily Evans, who had married into the Potter family and brought her own brilliance to their legacy. The book confirmed that this had been controversial among certain factions of magical society, families who believed that ancient bloodlines should remain pure. He read on, learning about the political movements that had risen and fallen over the centuries, each one claiming to represent traditional wizarding values while opposing Potter-supported reforms. The pattern was always the same. When economic hardship or social change created uncertainty, some families would rally around calls to return to the old ways, with Potter influence portrayed as dangerous foreign corruption of magical society. The most recent entry in the book made Harry's blood run cold. The Rise of the Dark Lord Voldemort, 1970 to 1981. The most successful anti-Potter movement in recent history combined traditional blood purity ideology with unprecedented violence. Key supporters included families with historical grievances against Potter economic influence. Malfoy, Lestrange, Nott, Avery, Crabbe, Goyle. These families provided funding and political cover for Voldemort's campaign, seeing his promises to restore traditional magical order as an opportunity to reclaim power lost to Potter-sponsored social reforms. Harry set the book aside with shaking hands. For the first time, He was beginning to understand why his parents had died. It hadn't been random violence or bad luck. It had been the culmination of centuries of resentment, the explosion of tensions that had been building for generations. His family hadn't just been victims of a mad wizard's killing spree. They had been targeted specifically because of who they were and what they represented. A soft knock on the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," he called. Griphook entered, carrying a tea service on a silver tray. "I thought you might be having difficulty sleeping, Lord Potter. The weight of family history often proves overwhelming on first encounter." "Did you know?" Harry asked without preamble. "When you were managing my parents' accounts, did you know they were in danger because of their political positions?" Griphook set down the tray and poured steaming tea into 2 delicate cups. "We knew there were tensions. The Dark Wizard had made threats against several prominent families who opposed his ideology, but we underestimated his willingness to act on those threats. My parents died because they supported Muggle-born wizards like my mother. Among other reasons, yes." Griphook handed Harry a cup of tea that smelled of honey and chamomile. "Your father spoke passionately about creating a magical society where talent mattered more than bloodline. Your mother proved, by her very existence and achievements, that Muggle-born wizards could be among the most powerful and brilliant of their generation." Harry sipped his tea, thinking about the implications. "And now I'm the Potter heir. The same families who supported Voldemort are still out there, aren't they? Still believing the same things? Many of them, yes. The Malfoy family, for instance, claimed to have been acting under magical compulsion during Voldemort's reign, but they have never publicly renounced their previous positions." Griphook settled into the room's other chair. "This is why your education and preparation are so crucial, Lord Potter. You will be walking into a society where some of the most powerful families view your very existence as a threat to their preferred order. But I'm just one person. I'm not even 11 yet. How can I be a threat to anyone? Because you represent more than yourself. You represent the Potter family's vision for magical society. Progressive, inclusive, merit-based rather than birth-based. And you control resources that could make that vision reality." Harry thought about the vaults, about the business holdings, about the 8% of magical Britain's economy that apparently depended on Potter family decisions. "You mean, if I use my inheritance the way my parents did, I could continue their work?" "Indeed. But that would also mean continuing the conflict that cost them their lives." The teacup rattled against its saucer as Harry set it down with unsteady hands. "So my choices are to abandon everything my family stood for, or to paint a target on my back like they did." "Those are not your only choices, Lord Potter." Griphook's voice was gentle but firm. "There is a third option. Be smarter than your parents were, more careful, more strategic." "What do you mean?" "Your parents were idealists who believed that doing the right thing, openly and honestly, would eventually triumph over prejudice and hatred. They were noble, but perhaps naive about the lengths their enemies would go to stop them." Harry leaned forward, interested despite his fear. "And you think I should be different?" "I think you should be effective. Your parents' approach was to stand in the light, proclaiming their values for all to see. Perhaps your approach should be more subtle. Work behind the scenes, build alliances carefully, advance your goals without giving your enemies clear targets." "Like what my family did for centuries before my parents?" "Precisely. The kingmakers rather than the kings. The power behind the throne rather than the throne itself." Harry picked up the history book again, flipping through pages that chronicled centuries of Potter influence, wielded quietly but decisively. They funded other people's causes, instead of leading them directly. And they survived. Your parents chose to be public leaders of the resistance against Voldemort. It was brave, it was noble, and it got them killed. Griphook's dark eyes were serious. You have the opportunity to be more like your earlier ancestors, influential without being obvious about it. Harry was quiet for a long time, processing this new perspective on his family's legacy and his own future. Finally, he asked, "If I decided to take that approach, how would it work? I'm still a child. I can't exactly start making political moves right now." "No, but you can start preparing. Learn about magical society from every angle, not just the official histories, but the hidden alliances and secret resentments. Understand who has power and why they have it. Begin building relationships with people who share your values, but aren't yet committed to any particular faction. And when I'm older, when you come of age, you'll have options your parents never had. You'll understand the game better than they did. You'll know which battles are worth fighting openly, and which are better won through careful manipulation of economic and political pressure." Harry thought about that. It felt both exciting and terrifying, the possibility that he could honor his parents' memory while avoiding their fate. "It sounds complicated. The most worthwhile things usually are. But you have advantages they lacked. You understand from the beginning that this is a war, not just a series of isolated conflicts. You know that your enemies will use any means necessary to achieve their goals, and you have time to prepare properly. 10 months until I turn 11. 10 months to learn everything you can about the world you're about to enter, to understand not just your family's history, but the current state of magical politics, economics, and social dynamics." Griphook stood, collecting the tea service. "I have prepared a reading list for you, and arranged for tutors in various subjects. If you're serious about reclaiming your inheritance responsibly, your education must begin immediately." After Griphook left, Harry returned to his books with renewed focus. This time, he read not just for information, but for strategy, looking for patterns and connections that might help him navigate the complex world he was about to enter. As the night wore on, he began to see possibilities that hadn't occurred to him before. Ways to support Muggle-born wizards without making himself a public target. Methods for using Potter wealth to create opportunities while maintaining plausible deniability. Strategies for building alliances with families who shared his values, but had never openly opposed the blood purists. By dawn, Harry had filled several pages with notes and questions, the beginning of what Griphook might call a strategic plan. It felt strange to think of himself as someone capable of strategic planning, but the books had made one thing clear. Potter heirs had always been expected to think beyond their immediate circumstances. He was still a 10-year-old boy who had spent the previous day locked in a cupboard. But he was also the heir to 8 centuries of accumulated wisdom, wealth, and responsibility. If he was going to honor that legacy while protecting himself and others, he needed to start thinking like both. The weight of gold and history was indeed overwhelming. But for the first time since arriving at Gringotts, Harry felt like it might be a weight he could learn to carry. When Griphook returned with breakfast, he found Harry already dressed and sitting at the room's small desk, surrounded by open books and covered in ink stains from his note-taking. "Ready to begin your real education, Lord Potter?" Harry looked up from his notes, and Griphook was surprised to see not the overwhelmed child of yesterday, but someone who was beginning to understand the scope of his inheritance and the possibilities it represented. "Yes," Harry said firmly. "I'm ready to learn how to be a Potter." Chapter 6. First Steps into Magical Society. Diagon Alley was like stepping into a dream. Harry emerged from the brick archway behind the leaky cauldron with Griphook at his side, and 2 additional goblin guards flanking them in formal Gringotts regalia. The cobblestone street stretched before him, lined with shops whose windows displayed wonders that made his head spin, cauldrons that stirred themselves, books whose pages fluttered like wings, robes that shimmered with their own inner light. But it was the people that truly caught his attention. Wizards and witches of all ages moved through the street with casual familiarity, their robes swishing as they chatted about things that sounded like pure fantasy. A woman near the fountain was discussing the merits of dragon heartstring versus phoenix feather for wand cores. 2 elderly men argued about the upcoming Quidditch season, mentioning team names that meant nothing to Harry, but clearly carried significant meaning for them. "Stay close, Lord Potter," Griphook murmured, as they began walking down the main street. "Diagon Alley is generally safe, but your presence here will not go unnoticed for long." Already, Harry could see heads turning in their direction. The sight of a young boy accompanied by Gringotts guards was apparently unusual enough to draw attention, but it was when someone whispered, "Potter," that the real stares began. Their first stop was a shop Harry hadn't noticed at first glance, a modest storefront squeezed between Flourish and Blot's bookstore and Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. The sign above the door read, "Scribulus Writing Implements," in elegant gold lettering. "One of your family's oldest business holdings," Griphook explained as they approached the door. "Established in 1674, when your ancestor Cornelius Potter invested in a struggling quill maker. Today, Scribulus supplies writing materials to most of magical Britain." The shopkeeper, a thin wizard with ink-stained fingers, nearly dropped his quill when Griphook introduced Harry. "Lord Potter, my goodness, we'd heard rumors, but to see you here—" He executed an awkward bow that made Harry feel uncomfortable. "I'm Reginald Scribulus, 5th generation to run this shop thanks to your family's support." "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Scribulus," Harry said, trying to remember the manners Aunt Petunia had drilled into him for meeting Vernon's business associates. "How is the shop doing?" "Wonderfully, my lord. Absolutely wonderfully. The self-inking quills have been our most popular item this season, and the demand for our premium parchment has exceeded all expectations." Scribulus beamed with pride. "Thanks to the Potter family's investment in our expansion last year, we've been able to open a second location in Edinburgh." Harry nodded politely, though internally he was noting that these were decisions apparently made in his name without his knowledge. Another item to add to his growing list of concerns about how his estate had been managed. They visited 3 more Potter-owned businesses along the alley: a potions ingredient supplier, a shop that sold magical measuring devices, and a small establishment that specialized in protective charms for homes and businesses. At each location, the pattern was the same: grateful proprietors eager to meet the Potter heir, thriving businesses that credited their success to Potter family support, and subtle references to decisions made on Lord Potter's behalf that he knew nothing about. "Your family's business network is extensive," Griphook observed as they walked between shops. "These visible storefronts represent only a fraction of Potter holdings. The family has controlling or significant interests in dozens of enterprises throughout magical Britain." "And they all think I've been making decisions about their businesses? Professor Dumbledore has been signing documents as your magical guardian. From their perspective, those are your decisions." Harry filed that information away for future consideration, another conversation he would need to have with the famous wizard he had yet to meet. Their next stop was one Harry had been both anticipating and dreading: Ollivander's wand shop. The narrow, cramped store felt ancient in a way that made Harry's skin prickle. Thousands of long, thin boxes were piled nearly to the ceiling on shelves that stretched back into shadows, deeper than the shop's physical dimensions should have allowed. A single wand lay on a faded purple cushion in the dusty window. "Ah," came a soft voice from the depths of the shop. "I wondered when I would see you again, Harry Potter." An old man emerged from between the shelves, his pale eyes gleaming in the dim light. Harry noticed that those eyes seemed to see far more than was comfortable. "Mr. Ollivander," Griphook said formally, "Lord Potter requires a wand." "Indeed he does." Ollivander studied Harry with unnerving intensity. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. It is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." Harry's hand flew instinctively to his forehead. "Its brother?" "Yes, 13.5 inches. You. Curious indeed how these things happen. The wand chooses the wizard, remember. I think we must expect great things from you. Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. A chill ran down Harry's spine. You mean the wizard who killed my parents had a wand that was related to mine? Twin cores, Mr. Potter. Twin phoenix feathers from the same bird. Such wands are rare, and their connection runs deeper than most wizards understand. Harry accepted the holly wand with trembling hands. The moment his fingers closed around the polished wood, warmth shot through his arm, and golden sparks showered from the wand's tip. The feeling was unlike anything he had ever experienced, like finding a missing piece of himself he hadn't known was lost. Excellent, Ollivander murmured. Most excellent indeed. As they left the wand shop with Harry's new wand carefully tucked into his jacket, Griphook spoke quietly. That was illuminating. How so? Ollivander has been selling wands for decades. His memory for such details is significant. The connection he described between your wand and the one that killed your parents will not remain secret long. Harry considered this. You mean people will hear about it and make assumptions? Indeed. Some may see it as a sign that you are destined to confront the Dark Wizard again. Others may wonder if the connection makes you dangerous. Griphook's dark eyes were serious. Information like this travels quickly through magical society, often with embellishments. Their next stop was the law offices of Goodwin, Clearwater, and Associates, housed in a tall, narrow building that seemed to lean slightly to the left. The interior was all dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal tomes. Mr. Goodwin himself, a portly wizard with greying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, greeted them in his office. Lord Potter, what an honour to meet you at last. Your family has been valued clients for generations. I understand you handle legal matters for the Potter estate. Indeed we do, though I must say, most of our recent work has been coordinating with Professor Dumbledore's office regarding charitable distributions and investment decisions. Goodwin shuffled through files on his desk. All perfectly legal under magical guardianship law, of course. What are my rights as the Potter heir? Harry asked directly. Goodwin blinked, apparently surprised by such a pointed question from someone so young. Well, that depends on your age and the specific nature of the decisions involved. At 10, you have limited rights but certain protections. At 11, you gain the right to review major expenditures. At 14, you can claim your lordship and take control of most family matters. At 17, you achieve full magical majority. And until then, your magical guardian retains authority to act in your best interests as they determined them. Harry exchanged a glance with Griphook, another confirmation that his current situation, while frustrating, was legally binding. As they left the law office and continued down Diagon Alley, Harry began to notice the subtle social dynamics at play. Some witches and wizards approached them with respectful interest, clearly recognizing the significance of the Potter name. Others observed from a distance, with expressions that ranged from curious to calculating to hostile. Near Madame Malkin's, they encountered a family that made Harry's newly acquired knowledge suddenly relevant. Well, well, drawled a man with long platinum hair and pale, cold eyes. If it isn't the famous Harry Potter, finally emerging from whatever hovel Dumbledore stashed him in. The man's wife, elegant and sharp-featured, studied Harry with predatory interest. Between them stood a boy who appeared to be Harry's age, with the same pale hair and superior expression. Lord Potter, Griphook said formally, may I present Lucius Malfoy and his family? Harry's mind immediately supplied the information he'd read the night before. The Malfoy family, centuries of opposition to Potter influence, suspected supporters of Voldemort, believers in blood purity and magical supremacy. Mr. Malfoy, Harry replied politely, remembering Griphook's advice about being strategic rather than confrontational. How fascinating to see you here, Lucius continued, his tone cultured, but with an underlying edge. I trust Gringotts is educating you about your family's rather progressive political positions? I'm learning about many things, Harry said carefully. I'm sure you are. Your parents had such interesting ideas about magical society, particularly regarding the proper place of certain types of wizards. His gaze flickered meaningfully to Griphook and the goblin guards. Harry felt anger rise in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. My family has always valued fairness and merit. Indeed. How noble. Lucius's smile was cold. I do hope you'll find magical society educational, young Potter. There are so many lessons to learn about tradition, heritage, and the natural order of things. Come along, Draco, the woman said to the pale boy, who had been staring at Harry with unconcealed hostility. We have shopping to complete. As the Malfoy family moved away, Harry heard Draco's voice carry back. Father, why were there goblins with him? Are we supposed to associate with creatures now? A valuable encounter, Griphook observed once they were out of earshot. You have now met the face of your family's traditional opposition. They didn't seem very dangerous, Harry said, though he was still unsettled by the interaction. Lucius Malfoy is one of the most politically influential wizards in magical Britain. His family's wealth and connections rival your own, and they use both to oppose everything your family represents. Griphook's voice was serious. Do not underestimate them because they choose to be polite in public. As they continued through Diagon Alley, Harry began to understand the complexity of the social landscape he was entering. Every interaction carried undercurrents of politics, history, and allegiance. The shopkeepers who bowed to him did so not just out of respect for his family's wealth, but because they depended on Potter business for their livelihoods. The families who nodded politely were calculating where he might fit into their own plans and alliances. By the time they returned to the entrance to Diagon Alley, Harry's head was spinning with new information and social dynamics he was only beginning to grasp. But he had also accomplished something important. He had been seen. Word would spread that the Potter heir was alive, aware of his heritage, and beginning to take an interest in his family's affairs. A successful first outing, Griphook declared as they prepared to return to Gringotts. You conducted yourself well, Lord Potter. Polite but not subservient, observant but not obviously calculating. I felt like everyone was judging me. They were, but that was unavoidable. Better to be judged while presenting yourself as competent and prepared than to remain hidden until circumstances force you into the open. As they walked back through the leaky cauldron toward the entrance to Gringotts, Harry reflected on everything he had learned during his first foray into magical society. It was a world of ancient rivalries and hidden agendas where his family name carried both tremendous power and significant risk. But it was also a world where he belonged, where his heritage meant something, where the choices he made could influence the lives of thousands of people. For the first time since learning about magic, Harry felt like he was beginning to understand not just what he had inherited, but what he could become. The real education was just beginning. Chapter 7. Whispers in Diagon Alley. By the next morning, the entire magical world seemed to know that Harry Potter had returned. Griphook appeared at Harry's guest quarters with a collection of newspapers, letters, and urgent messages that had arrived overnight. The goblin's expression was carefully neutral, but Harry caught a glint of what might have been amusement in his dark eyes. Your public appearance yesterday has generated considerable interest, Griphook said, spreading the morning's daily profit across the table. Perhaps more than we anticipated. The headline made Harry's stomach drop. Boy who lived returns. Potter heir spotted in Diagon Alley. Below it was a moving photograph that showed Harry walking between the goblin guards, his new wand visible in his jacket pocket. The article was filled with speculation about where he had been, why he was emerging now, and what his presence meant for the magical community. They make me sound like some sort of returning king, Harry muttered, reading phrases like, rightful heir reclaiming his destiny, and the Potter fortune awakens. To many in our world, you are something like that, Griphook replied. The Potter name carries significant weight, and your survival of the killing curse made you a legend before you could walk. Your sudden appearance, clearly aware of your heritage and accompanied by Gringotts officials, sends a very specific message. What message? That the Potter family is no longer absent from magical politics. That decisions will no longer be made about Potter assets without Potter involvement. Harry was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Another goblin entered, carrying an ornate letter sealed with wax that bore a coat of arms Harry didn't recognize. From the noble house of Bones, the goblin announced. Lady Amelia Bones requests an audience at Lord Potter's earliest convenience. Bones, Griphook said approvingly. An old and honourable family. They were allies of your parents during the war against the Dark Lord. More letters followed throughout the morning. The Longbottom family, expressing joy at his survival and offering renewed alliance. The Abbott family, requesting a meeting to discuss mutual interests. Even international correspondence from magical families in France and America who had maintained business relationships with the Potters for generations. But it was the unexpected visitor who arrived just before noon that truly caught Harry's attention. Rita Skeeter, the witch announced herself with a brilliant smile and an extended, jeweled hand. Senior correspondent for the Daily Prophet. Such an honor to meet the famous Harry Potter at last. She had managed to reach the guest quarters through means Griphook clearly found concerning, judging by his narrowed eyes and the way his hand moved toward the dagger at his belt. Ms. Skeeter, Harry said carefully, not taking her offered hand. I wasn't expecting visitors. Of course not, dear. But the public is simply dying to know about your remarkable return to our world. Where have you been all these years? What brings you to Gringotts now? And what are your plans for the future? Her quill was moving across parchment before Harry had even responded, apparently writing its own version of the conversation. I'm afraid I'm not ready to give interviews, Harry said politely. Oh, but surely just a few questions. Our readers have such a right to know about their hero. You're quite the mysterious young man, aren't you? Some say you've been hidden away by Dumbledore himself. Others whisper about foreign training or secret preparations for a return to prominence. Harry noticed that her quill was writing furiously, despite the fact that he hadn't confirmed any of those speculations. As I said, I'm not giving interviews at this time. Security concerns, then? How very intriguing. And those goblin guards, quite unusual for a young wizard to have such protection. One might wonder what threats you're facing, or perhaps what important business requires such precautions. Griphook stepped forward. Mrs. Skeeter, you are trespassing on Gringotts' property. I suggest you leave immediately, unless you would prefer to discuss the matter with our security. Rita's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Of course. But Lord Potter, do remember that the public has a right to know about their heroes. Silence often breeds more speculation than truth. After she left, Griphook shook his head grimly. That woman is dangerous. Her articles shape public opinion, and she has little regard for accuracy when drama serves her purposes better. What kind of speculation was she talking about? I've heard whispers since your appearance yesterday. Some believe Dumbledore has been hiding you away, preparing you for some grand purpose. Others suspect you've been receiving special training or education. A few wonder if your absence was voluntary, if you've been planning your return to claim what's rightfully yours. Harry thought about that. And what do people think about my appearance with Gringotts guards? That sends its own message. Gringotts guards accompany only the most important clients, or those facing specific threats. Your use of our protection suggests either that you're already wielding significant influence, or that you expect to need protection from those who oppose that influence. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors that gave Harry his first real education in magical politics. Lady Amelia Bones proved to be a stern but kind woman who served in the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She spoke carefully about the current state of magical government and her concerns about the influence of families who had supported Voldemort but escaped consequences. "Your parents stood for justice and equality," she told Harry over tea in Gringotts' formal meeting room. "Their loss was felt throughout the magical community, but perhaps none more so than by those of us who shared their vision for a better world." "What happened to that vision after they died?" Harry asked. Lady Bones was quiet for a long moment. "It became more difficult to pursue. Dumbledore commanded great respect after the war, but his methods are different from your parents', more focused on individual redemption than structural change. Many of us who supported your family's initiatives found ourselves marginalized." "You mean the people who opposed my parents gained influence?" "Not openly, but quietly, yes. Families like the Malfoys, who claimed they were acting under magical compulsion during the war, were able to return to positions of influence. Meanwhile, those who had openly opposed Voldemort found their political capital diminished." This was followed by a meeting with Lord Longbottom, a portly wizard who seemed genuinely delighted to meet Harry, but also carried an air of deep sadness. "Your parents and my wife Alice served together," he explained. "She always said James and Lily understood that the fight wasn't just against one dark wizard, but against the ideology that allowed him to rise in the first place." "What happened to your wife?" Harry asked gently. "She and my son Neville's father were damaged by dark magic shortly after your parents died. They're at St. Mungo's now, but they're not themselves anymore." Lord Longbottom's voice was heavy with grief. "Neville is being raised by his grandmother. He's about your age, actually. Perhaps you'll meet him when you begin your formal education." But it was the evening meeting that provided the most illuminating and troubling information. Cornelius Clearwater, son of the lawyer Harry had met the previous day, arrived with a collection of documents that made Harry's head spin. "Marriage contracts," Clearwater explained, spreading parchments across the table. "Your parents negotiated several potential alliances before their deaths, though none were finalized due to the war." Harry stared at the documents, trying to process what he was seeing. "You mean they were arranging marriages for me?" "Not arranging, precisely. More like establishing frameworks for potential future alliances. The contracts are conditional, requiring your consent when you come of age. But they do exist." Griphook leaned forward to examine the documents. The Bones family, the Longbottoms, the Abbotts, all respectable pure-blood families with progressive political views. "What about families that opposed my parents?" Harry asked. "Interestingly, yes. There are also conditional contracts with families like the Greengrasses and the Davies, families who remained officially neutral during the war, but whose loyalties were questionable. Why would my parents negotiate with families they didn't trust?" "Because," Clearwater said carefully, "sometimes political alliance through marriage can convert potential enemies into allies. A Greengrass daughter married to the Potter heir might find her family's interests suddenly aligned with Potter values." Harry felt overwhelmed by the implications. "So even my future marriage is supposed to serve political purposes?" "Welcome to pure-blood politics," Griphook said dryly. "Though remember, these are merely frameworks. You retain the right to reject any and all contracts when you come of age." As the evening wore on, more information filtered in through Griphook's network of contacts throughout magical London. Harry learned that his appearance had triggered emergency meetings among several prominent families, both those who supported and those who opposed Potter influence. "The Malfoys have called in debts and favors," Griphook reported. "They're gathering information about your education, your political inclinations, your potential allies. They want to understand what kind of threat you represent." "And the families who supported my parents?" "They're equally active, but more hopeful. Many had resigned themselves to the Potter line, being effectively extinct. Your return gives them an opportunity to revive political initiatives that have been dormant for years." "What kind of initiatives?" "Magical creature rights legislation. improved protections for Muggle-born wizards, educational reforms at Hogwarts, economic policies that favor merit over bloodline connections. Griphook's expression was serious. These are the issues your parents championed, and the same issues that made them enemies among blood-purist families. Harry leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything he had learned. In the space of 2 days, he had gone from being a powerless orphan to the center of magical Britain's political landscape. Every move he made, every alliance he formed, every decision he delayed would ripple through a society that had been shaped by his family's influence for centuries. "There's something else," Griphook said quietly. "Our intelligence network has detected increased activity around Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts. Urgent communications with ministry officials, private meetings with prominent families. Your emergence has apparently forced him to accelerate certain plans." "What kind of plans?" "Unknown. But the timing is suspicious. Within hours of your public appearance, he began reaching out to the same families you've been meeting with today." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's temperature. "You think he's trying to counter my influence?" "I think Professor Dumbledore has grown comfortable making decisions about Potter affairs without Potter involvement. Your active participation threatens that comfortable arrangement." As Harry prepared for sleep that night, his mind was churning with names, alliances, threats, and opportunities. The magical world was vastly more complex than he had imagined, filled with centuries-old grudges, competing visions for the future, and power structures that his family had helped create and could potentially reshape. But for the first time since arriving at Gringotts, Harry felt like he was beginning to understand the game he was playing. Tomorrow, he would begin playing it in earnest. Chapter 8. The Dumbledore Problem. The ledgers made for grim reading. Harry sat in Gringotts' deepest archive chamber, surrounded by 9 years' worth of financial records that documented every decision made regarding the Potter estate since his parents' death. Griphook had provided detailed explanations of magical accounting practices, but even without that knowledge, certain patterns were disturbingly clear. 300,000 galleons to the International Confederation of Wizards Peace Initiative. Harry read aloud, his finger tracing down the columns. What does that organization actually do? Officially, promote international magical cooperation and peaceful resolution of conflicts between magical governments. Griphook's tone suggested skepticism. In practice, it serves as a platform for prominent wizards to advance their personal diplomatic agendas. And Professor Dumbledore is involved with it? He serves as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation. The position is largely ceremonial, but it does provide significant political influence and prestige. Harry continued reading through the donations, cross-referencing them with notes Griphook had provided about various magical organizations. A disturbing picture was beginning to emerge. Nearly every major charitable contribution made in his name served to enhance Dumbledore's political position or advance causes that aligned with the older wizard's known interests. The Wizengamot Reform Initiative received 500,000 galleons over 2 years, Harry noted. What were they trying to reform? Ancient family representation laws. The initiative sought to reduce the voting power of hereditary seats in favor of elected positions. Griphook's expression was carefully neutral. If successful, it would have significantly diminished the political influence of families like yours. Harry set down his quill and stared at the goblin. You mean Professor Dumbledore used my family's money to fund efforts to reduce my family's political power? That is one interpretation of the evidence. What's another interpretation? That Professor Dumbledore genuinely believed such reforms would create a more democratic and fair magical government, and was willing to sacrifice Potter family influence for what he saw as the greater good. Harry thought about that. Both interpretations were troubling, but for different reasons. Either way, he was making decisions about my inheritance that directly affected my future political position without consulting me or considering what my parents might have wanted. Indeed. And there are other concerning patterns. Griphook produced another set of ledgers, these ones tracking not donations, but business decisions. Harry learned that several profitable Potter family investments had been liquidated during his minority, with the proceeds redirected to less profitable but more socially responsible ventures. Dragon breeding farms sold, the money invested in magical creature sanctuaries, Harry read. Wizarding weapons manufacturers divested, funds moved to healing potion research. Defense contractor holdings liquidated to support peaceful magical education initiatives. All admirable causes, Griphook said carefully, but also all significantly less profitable than the original investments. Your parents built their wealth through careful balance of ethical considerations and business acumen. These decisions prioritize ethics while ignoring economic realities. How much money has been lost through these changes? Difficult to calculate precisely, but conservative estimates suggest the Potter estate has foregone approximately 1 million galleons in potential profits over the past 9 years. Harry rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache building behind his scar. So Professor Dumbledore has been using my money to fund his political agenda, while simultaneously making decisions that reduce my family's wealth and influence. That is one way to interpret the evidence. Stop saying that, Harry said with some irritation. What do you think is happening? Griphook was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. I think Professor Dumbledore is a complicated man who genuinely believes he is acting in your best interests and the best interests of the magical world. But I also think his definition of best interests may not align with yours, and that he has grown comfortable making decisions that serve his vision of how the world should be, rather than honoring what your parents might have wanted. What did my parents want? I mean, specifically, what instructions did they leave about how their money should be used if something happened to them? Griphook produced another document, this one bearing the Potter family seal. Your parents' will was quite specific about charitable giving. They wanted support for St. Mungo's Hospital, Hogwarts scholarships for disadvantaged students, war orphan assistance, and magical creature welfare programs. They also specified that such giving should not exceed 5% of estate income in any given year. Harry compared the will's instructions to the actual giving patterns. Professor Dumbledore has been donating nearly 15% of the estate's income annually, and most of it to causes my parents never mentioned. Correct. And this is all legal? Under magical guardianship law, yes. A magical guardian has broad discretion to act in their ward's best interests, including making financial decisions they believe will benefit the ward's long-term welfare. Harry set down the will and leaned back in his chair. What about placing me with the Dursleys? Surely there were better options. This question prompted Griphook to produce yet another set of documents, correspondence between Dumbledore and various magical families who had offered to raise Harry after his parents' death. The Longbottoms offered immediately, Griphook explained, as Harry read through letters that made his chest tight with emotion. As did the Bones family, the Abbotts, the Weasleys, and even some international families with Potter business connections. All were rejected. Why? Professor Dumbledore cited security concerns. He claimed that placing you with a magical family would make you a target for remaining Death Eaters, supporters of the Dark Lord who might seek revenge. He argued that the blood protection from your mother's sacrifice required you to live with her sister. Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about Vernon's fists, and Petunia's cold neglect. But there wasn't any blood protection, was there? The Dursleys never willingly took me in. They resented me from the beginning. Indeed, which raises questions about Professor Dumbledore's true motives for that placement. What kind of questions? Griphook hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of what he was about to say. It is possible that Professor Dumbledore wanted you to remain ignorant of the magical world and your place in it. A Harry Potter raised by magical families would have grown up understanding his heritage, his political importance, his responsibilities and opportunities. A Harry Potter raised by muggles who despised magic would remain manageable. The words hit Harry like a physical blow. You think he deliberately placed me somewhere I'd be kept weak and ignorant? I think it is a possibility worth considering. Professor Dumbledore is a brilliant man with strong opinions about how the magical world should be governed. A politically aware Potter heir, raised to understand his family's traditional role and prepared to claim his inheritance, might pursue policies that conflict with Dumbledore's vision. Harry stood and began pacing around the chamber, his mind racing. Everything he had learned over the past few days was coalescing into a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than he had expected. He's been preparing for this, Harry said suddenly. All those meetings yesterday, all that urgent activity. He knows I'm here, knows I'm learning about my inheritance and asking questions. He's probably preparing his own response. Very likely. The question is, what will that response be? Harry stopped pacing and looked at Griphook directly. What are my options? Legally, I mean. Is there anything I can do to protect myself or challenge his authority? Limited options while you remain a minor. However, there are some protections available. We can implement additional safeguards on your accounts that require your personal approval for expenditures above certain thresholds. We can also document irregularities in estate management for potential future legal challenges. And less legal options? Griphook's smile was sharp. Information is power, Lord Potter. The more you learn about Professor Dumbledore's activities, his methods, his supporters and opponents, the better positioned you will be when you eventually confront him directly. I need to know everything, Harry said, decision crystallizing in his mind. His business connections, his political alliances, his personal finances, his relationships with ministry officials. If he's been using my inheritance to advance his agenda, I want to understand exactly what that agenda is and how it affects me. That will take time. Such information is not easily obtained. I have 10 months until my 11th birthday, and I'm beginning to think I'll need every day of that time to prepare properly. Griphook nodded approvingly. Patience and preparation are valuable qualities in both politics and business. Your ancestors would be proud. Over the following hours, Harry and Griphook developed what could only be called an intelligence-gathering strategy. They identified key figures in Dumbledore's network of allies and supporters. They mapped out the political and economic connections between various charitable organizations and magical institutions. They began tracking patterns of correspondence and meeting schedules that might reveal upcoming initiatives or policy changes. We'll need more than just financial records, Harry realized as they worked. I need to understand who supports him and why, who might be willing to oppose him, what leverage he has over various ministry officials and influential families. Agreed. Such information will require discreet inquiries through multiple channels. Gringotts has extensive contacts throughout magical society, but gathering this intelligence will take time and careful coordination. Do it, Harry said firmly. Whatever resources you need, whatever costs are involved. This is my inheritance he's been manipulating, my family's reputation he's been using, my future he's been reshaping without my knowledge or consent. As the day wore on, Harry found himself feeling something he had never experienced before, genuine anger. Not the helpless rage he felt when Vernon hit him or Dudley tormented him, but cold, strategic fury directed at someone who had betrayed a trust he hadn't even known existed. Dumbledore had positioned himself as Harry's protector and guardian, but had used that position to advance his own interests at Harry's expense. He had claimed to act in Harry's best interests while making decisions that diminished Harry's power and kept him ignorant of his own heritage. Worst of all, he had done it all legally, using the very laws and institutions that were supposed to protect orphaned heirs like Harry. There's something else we need to consider, Griphook said, as they prepared to conclude their session. Professor Dumbledore will not remain passive once he realizes the extent of your investigation. He has significant resources and influence. If he perceives you as a threat to his plans, he may take steps to limit your ability to act. What kind of steps? Unknown. But a man who was willing to place you with abusive relatives to serve his purposes may be willing to use other questionable methods to maintain control. Harry thought about that, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's temperature. Then I need to be very careful about how I proceed. Indeed. And you need allies who can provide protection and support independent of Dumbledore's influence. Like the families I met yesterday. Like them, yes, but also others. The more people who know about your investigation and support your right to control your own inheritance, the harder it will be for anyone to act against you without consequences. As Harry prepared for sleep that night, his mind was churning with plans and possibilities. The investigation into Dumbledore's activities would be complex and dangerous, but it was also necessary. He could not allow the manipulation of his inheritance and his life to continue unchallenged. For too long, other people had made decisions about Harry Potter's life without his knowledge or consent. That pattern was going to end, regardless of how powerful or well-intentioned those people believed themselves to be. The boy who had once cowered in a cupboard under the stairs was learning to think strategically about power, influence, and the long-term consequences of decisions made in his name. And he was discovering that he had very little patience for those who claimed to know what was best for him while refusing to tell him the truth. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Chapter 9. Building the Network. Harry's transformation from passive victim to strategic player began with a list. Sitting in his guest quarters at Gringotts, surrounded by genealogical charts, business records, and political analyses that Griphook's network had provided, Harry carefully wrote down every magical family that had historical connections to the Potters. The list was longer than he had expected, stretching across 3 pages of parchment and representing centuries of accumulated alliances, business partnerships, and mutual obligations. The key, Griphook had explained, is to distinguish between families who supported your family's values and those who merely conducted business with them. Financial relationships can be broken easily. Ideological alliances run much deeper. Harry studied the annotations Griphook had provided beside each name. The Bones family, strong alliance, shared commitment to magical law enforcement reform. The Longbottoms, close personal friendship, aligned political views, mutual support during Voldemort crisis. The Weasleys, modest means but unwavering loyalty, consistent support for Potter initiatives despite personal cost. But there were others that required more careful consideration. The Greengrasses, traditional pure-blood family, remained officially neutral during war, but privately opposed Voldemort. Pragmatic rather than idealistic, potential allies if approached correctly. The Davies, ancient family with progressive tendencies, historically supported Potter educational reforms, but withdrew from politics during war out of fear. These families, Harry said, pointing to the second category, they could go either way depending on how I approach them. Indeed. And your approach will determine whether they become assets or obstacles. Griphook settled into the chair across from Harry's desk, which is why your next steps are crucial. You need to build a network of genuine allies before Professor Dumbledore realizes the extent of your investigation and takes action to limit your influence. Harry had spent hours the night before thinking about this. Dumbledore's manipulation of his inheritance was deeply troubling, but a direct confrontation would be both premature and dangerous. Instead, he needed to build his own power base, people who would support his right to control his inheritance and make his own decisions about his family's legacy. I want to start with the families who offered to raise me, Harry said. They already demonstrated genuine concern for my welfare. That's a foundation I can build on. The first meeting of what Harry privately thought of as his informal advisory council took place 3 days later in a private dining room deep within Gringotts. Harry had invited Lady Amelia Bones, Lord Longbottom, and Augusta Longbottom, who had insisted on representing her family alongside her son-in-law. Also present were Griphook, Ragnok, and Edmund Scribulus, not the shopkeeper Harry had met earlier, but his father, who managed the broader network of Potter business investments. "This is highly irregular," Lady Bones said, as they settled around the polished conference table. "A 10-year-old heir convening strategic meetings with business advisors and political allies." "Yes," Harry replied calmly. "But then, 9 years of having my inheritance managed without my knowledge or consent is also highly irregular." Augusta Longbottom's laugh was sharp and approving. "Spoken like a true Potter. Your father had the same directness when he was frustrated with political nonsense." "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, Lord Potter?" Lord Longbottom asked gently. Harry had prepared for this question. "I want to understand my options. I want to know what resources are available to me, what obligations I've inherited, and what challenges I'm likely to face as I begin taking more active control of my family's affairs." "And you believe Professor Dumbledore would not provide such guidance?" Lady Bones's tone was carefully neutral. "I believe Professor Dumbledore has been making decisions about my inheritance that serve his political agenda, rather than honoring my parents' wishes or preparing me to fulfill my responsibilities as the Potter heir." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Augusta Longbottom spoke. "That's a serious accusation, young man." "It's a serious situation." Harry gestured to the financial records spread across the table. "These documents show 9 years of charitable donations that contradict my parents' explicit instructions, business decisions that have reduced my family's political influence, and investment choices that prioritize ideology over financial responsibility." Edmund Scribulus leaned forward to examine the records. "The diversification away from defense contractors, that alone has cost the estate nearly 300,000 galleons in lost profits, and the liquidation of the dragon breeding investments." He shook his head. "Those were some of your family's most successful long-term holdings." "More importantly," Lady Bones said, her voice grave, "the donations to the Wizengamot Reform Initiative represent a direct attack on hereditary seat voting rights. If those reforms had passed, your family's political influence would have been permanently diminished." "Using Potter money to reduce Potter political power," Augusta Longbottom said with obvious disgust. "That's not guardianship. That's sabotage." Harry felt a surge of validation. These weren't naive children or biased goblins expressing concern. These were respected members of magical society who understood the implications of what Dumbledore had been doing. "So the question," Harry said, "is what I can do about it, and how you might be willing to help." The conversation that followed lasted nearly 4 hours. Harry learned about magical legal procedures for challenging guardianship decisions, political strategies for rebuilding Potter family influence, and business approaches for restoring the estate's financial position. More importantly, he began to understand the network of relationships and obligations that connected magical Britain's most influential families. "The Abbots would support you," Lady Bones said, consulting her own notes. "They've been frustrated by Dumbledore's dominance in educational policy debates. Your family's historical support for Hogwarts reform gives you natural common ground." "The McKinnons as well," Augusta Longbottom added. "They lost family members fighting Voldemort and have felt marginalized since the war ended. They'd welcome Potter leadership on veterans' affairs and war orphan support." "What about the neutral families?" Harry asked. "The ones who stayed out of the war?" "More complex," Lord Longbottom admitted. "They're naturally cautious about aligning with any political faction, but they're also pragmatic. If you can demonstrate that Potter leadership serves their interests." "Money talks," Edmund Scribulus said bluntly. "Your family controls enough business interests to make neutrality expensive for families who depend on Potter-connected enterprises for their prosperity." Harry made notes as they talked, building a mental map of magical Britain's political landscape. He was beginning to see possibilities, ways to rebuild his family's influence through careful alliance building, strategic use of economic leverage, and patient political maneuvering. But he also recognized that such efforts would take time and that his window for preparation was limited. "I need to accelerate my education," he said, as the meeting drew toward a close. "I can't wait for Hogwarts to learn about magic, politics, and the responsibilities I'll be inheriting. I need private tutors, books, practical experience with magical society." "Arranged," Griphook said immediately. "We have contacts among the finest magical tutors in Europe. Charms, transfiguration, potions, history, magical law, political theory. All can be provided discreetly." "What about practical experience?" Harry asked. "Board meetings," Ragnok suggested. "You cannot vote until you reach majority, but you can observe. Potter family holdings entitle you to observer status at dozens of corporate and institutional board meetings. You could learn how magical businesses operate, how political decisions are made, how influence is wielded behind the scenes." Lady Bones nodded approvingly. "Accelerated education, practical experience, strategic alliance building. It's an ambitious program for someone your age." "It's a necessary program," Harry replied. "Every day I remain ignorant and unprepared is another day that others make decisions about my life and my family's legacy without my input." As the meeting concluded, each of his advisors committed to specific tasks. Lady Bones would reach out to her contacts in the ministry to gauge political sentiment and identify potential allies. The Longbottoms would coordinate with other families who had supported Harry's parents during the war. Edmund Scribulus would conduct a comprehensive review of Potter business holdings to identify opportunities for strategic influence. Most importantly, all agreed to discretion. Harry's efforts to build independent support and accelerate his education needed to proceed without drawing attention from those who might prefer him to remain powerless and ignorant. That evening, as Harry reviewed his notes from the meeting, he reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed in less than a week. He had gone from being a powerless orphan locked in a cupboard to the center of a growing network of allies and advisors who were helping him prepare to reclaim his birthright. But he had also gained a much clearer understanding of the challenges ahead. Dumbledore's manipulation of his inheritance was just one aspect of a complex political landscape filled with competing interests and ancient rivalries. Taking control of his family's legacy would require not just wealth and determination, but genuine political skill and strategic patience. The next morning brought his first private tutor, Professor Adeline Clearwater, a witch who had taught advanced magical theory at several European schools before retiring to private practice. She arrived at Gringotts, carrying an armload of books and an expression of amused curiosity. "So," she said, settling into the chair Griphook had provided in Harry's quarters, "you want to learn 9 years of magical education in 10 months? Is that possible? For someone with your bloodline and apparent intelligence? Challenging but not impossible." She opened the first book, revealing pages covered with moving diagrams and text that shifted as Harry watched. "We'll start with magical theory and basic spell work. You'll need to understand how magic functions before you can hope to use it effectively." The first lesson was simultaneously frustrating and exhilarating. Harry struggled with pronunciation and wand movements that felt awkward and unnatural, but when he finally managed to levitate a feather using the Wingardium Leviosa charm, the sense of accomplishment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Excellent," Professor Clearwater said, as the feather danced through the air under Harry's control. "You have natural talent and strong focus. With daily practice and dedicated study, you should be able to master first and second-year material well before your 11th birthday. What about advanced subjects? Politics, magical law, economic theory? Those will require different tutors with specialized expertise. But the foundation is magical competence. You cannot effectively lead magical society if you do not understand magic itself." As the days passed, Harry settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. Mornings with Professor Clearwater, learning magical theory and practicing basic spells. Afternoons with various specialists who taught him about magical law, political history, and economic principles. Evenings reviewing intelligence reports from Griphook's network and planning his next moves in the complex game of magical politics. The transformation was remarkable. Harry was gaining not just knowledge and skills, but confidence and strategic vision. He was beginning to see himself not as a victim of circumstances, but as someone with the power and resources to shape those circumstances according to his family's values and his own emerging understanding of right and wrong. But perhaps most importantly, he was building relationships with people who believed in his potential and were committed to helping him succeed. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter was not alone. And as he prepared for sleep each night, surrounded by books and notes and plans for the future, he felt something he had never experienced before. Genuine hope that tomorrow would be better than today, and that he had the power to make it so. Chapter 10. The Young Lord's Gambit. The letter that would change everything was deceptively simple. Harry sat at his desk in the Gringotts guest quarters, carefully reviewing the parchment that would announce his first major political move to magical Britain. The language was formal, but unmistakable in its implications. To the heads of ancient and noble houses. By right of inheritance and magical compact, I, Harry James Potter, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, do hereby formally notify all concerned parties that I am assuming active oversight of Potter family interests and obligations, effective immediately. All outstanding debts, contracts, and mutual assistance agreements entered into by previous Potter lords remain in full effect. I look forward to renewed cooperation in matters of mutual benefit to our families and the magical community. Respectfully, Harry J. Potter, heir to the House of Potter. It's perfect, Augusta Longbottom declared from her seat across the room. Polite enough to avoid giving offense, but clear enough that everyone will understand exactly what you're doing. And what exactly am I doing? Harry asked, though he already knew the answer. Calling in 8 centuries' worth of accumulated favors and obligations, Griphook replied with obvious satisfaction. Your family has provided loans, political support, business partnerships, and emergency assistance to virtually every major magical family in Britain. Most assumed those debts died with your parents. They're about to learn otherwise, Lady Bones added. She had arrived an hour earlier, with a portfolio of legal documents that made Harry's head spin. These are just the formal agreements we've been able to locate. There are undoubtedly dozens more informal obligations that will surface once word of your letter spreads. Harry stood and walked to the window that looked out over Gringotts' main hall. Even from his elevated position, he could see the increased activity as goblins prepared for what was about to unfold. Ragnarok had been coordinating with his counterparts in other banks, ensuring that the full extent of Potter financial influence would be clearly demonstrated when the time came. Are you certain about this timing? Lord Longbottom asked. Once you send those letters, there's no taking back what follows. Harry thought about that question. In the 2 weeks since his first advisory council meeting, he had learned more about magical politics and economics than most wizards absorbed in a lifetime. His private tutors had accelerated his magical education to the point where he could perform third-year spells with confidence. Most importantly, his intelligence network had provided a clear picture of the forces arraying themselves for and against Potter family influence. Professor Dumbledore has called a private meeting with ministry officials for tomorrow, Harry said finally. According to our sources, he intends to propose new restrictions on underage magical activity and expanded authority for magical guardians over their wards' estates. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. He's moving to limit your options before you can claim them, Augusta Longbottom said grimly. Exactly. Which means I need to demonstrate my political relevance before he can argue that I'm just a child who needs continued protection and management. Harry turned back to face the room. Send the letters, The response was immediate and dramatic. By the next morning, Gringotts' main hall was filled with representatives from every major magical family in Britain. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern, and a few out of barely concealed panic as they realized the implications of Potter Heirs' sudden activation. Harry's first meeting was with Cornelius Fudge, the ambitious junior official in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, who had been quietly building his own power base within the ministry. Fudge arrived looking nervous but trying to project confidence. "Lord Potter," Fudge said with an awkward bow. "What an unexpected pleasure to finally meet you. I trust you're settling well into, your new circumstances?" "I'm learning a great deal about my family's traditional relationships," Harry replied politely, "including the Potter family's role in funding the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes expansion in 1987. Fudge's face went slightly pale. "Ah, yes. That was very generous support, much appreciated by the ministry." "I'm sure it was. I understand the funding was contingent on certain administrative reforms that were supposed to improve emergency response times and reduce bureaucratic delays." Harry consulted the notes in front of him. "How are those reforms progressing?" "Well, you know how these things go. Government bureaucracy moves slowly, lots of competing priorities." "I see. And the Potter family's ongoing financial support for the department. That's also moving slowly." The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Fudge straightened in his chair, clearly recognizing that this conversation was not going as he had expected. "Of course, we're always happy to discuss ways to accelerate important reforms," he said quickly. "Perhaps we could arrange a review of current procedures, identify areas for improvement." "That would be excellent. I'll have my advisors coordinate with your department." Harry smiled. The Potter family has always valued efficient government service. Similar conversations followed throughout the day. The Malfoy family's business manager arrived to discuss potential adjustments to contracts that had become somewhat outdated. The Knott family sent a representative to explore renewed cooperation on magical transportation ventures. Even the Parkinson family, long-time opponents of Potter social policies, sent cautious inquiries about mutually beneficial arrangements. But it was the afternoon meeting that truly demonstrated the extent of Harry's growing influence. Minister Millicent Bagnold herself arrived at Gringotts, accompanied by a small entourage of senior ministry officials. Her presence sent a clear signal throughout magical Britain. The Potter heir was being taken seriously at the highest levels of government. "Lord Potter," the minister said, as they settled in Gringotts' most formal conference room, "I understand you've been exploring your family's traditional roles in magical society." "I've been learning about my inheritance and the responsibilities that come with it," Harry replied carefully. "Indeed. And I'm sure you understand that with such influence comes certain obligations to work within established systems and procedures." Harry met her gaze steadily. "I understand that my family has always worked to strengthen magical society's institutions and support effective governance. I hope to continue that tradition." "Excellent. Then I'm sure you'll appreciate the importance of stable transition periods when young heirs are learning to manage complex inheritances. Sometimes additional oversight and guidance can be valuable." "I appreciate the minister's concern," Harry interrupted politely. "But I should mention that I've been reviewing my family's traditional role in ministry funding and operations. The Potter contribution to the ministry's annual budget is quite substantial, approximately 12% of total revenues when you include direct funding, business taxes, and charitable donations to ministry-supported programs." The minister's expression became very still. "I see. I've also been consulting with other ancient families about coordinated approaches to supporting effective governance. The Bones, Longbottom, and Abbott families have expressed interest in renewed cooperation on magical law enforcement and educational initiatives." What Harry was describing amounted to a potential political coalition that could significantly influence ministry policy. Coming from a 10-year-old, it should have sounded absurd, but coming from the Potter heir, backed by one of the largest fortunes in magical Britain and supported by a growing network of allied families, it sounded like a serious political threat. Of course, such cooperation would depend on the ministry's willingness to work constructively with traditional magical families rather than constraining their ability to fulfill their historical roles. Minister Bagnold was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of what she had just heard. Finally, she spoke. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding about proposed administrative changes. Perhaps it would be wise to postpone any new regulations until we've had more time for consultation with affected parties." "That sounds very prudent," Harry agreed. After the minister left, Harry found himself alone with Griphook and Ragnok in the conference room. The two goblins were regarding him with expressions that might have been approval or amazement. "That," Ragnok said finally, "was expertly handled. You managed to demonstrate your political relevance, secure allies, and neutralize a potential threat without making any enemies or commitments you can't fulfill. Did I really stop Dumbledore's proposed restrictions? You stopped them for now. More importantly, you've established yourself as a political actor who must be consulted before major decisions affecting your interests." Griphook's sharp smile was satisfied. "Professor Dumbledore can no longer act as though you're simply a child who can be managed through his authority over your guardianship. What happens next? Next, magical Britain adjusts to the reality that the Potter family has returned to active participation in magical politics." Ragnok leaned back in his chair. "Some will welcome that development. Others will not. All will have to account for it in their own planning." That evening, as Harry reviewed reports from throughout magical Britain describing the day's reactions to his political emergence, he reflected on how much had changed since his desperate escape from Privet Drive less than 3 weeks earlier. He was no longer the powerless orphan locked in a cupboard, dependent on adult decisions he couldn't influence or understand. He was Lord Potter in all but legal formality, backed by vast wealth, growing political influence, and a network of allies who respected his judgment and supported his goals. But he was also acutely aware that his success today had been possible only because of careful preparation, strategic thinking, and the element of surprise. His opponents, and he now understood clearly that he had opponents, would not be caught off guard again. The real test would be sustaining his influence and continuing to build his power base while navigating the complex challenges that would inevitably follow. As he prepared for sleep, Harry smiled at the memory of Minister Bagnold's expression when she realized she was facing not a confused child, but a capable political operator who understood exactly how much influence his family commanded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But tonight, Harry Potter went to sleep, knowing that he was no longer at the mercy of others' decisions about his life and future. He was beginning to shape those decisions himself, and he was discovering that he was quite good at it. Chapter 11. The Price of Power. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a frantic letter from Reginald Scribulus. Harry was reviewing his morning correspondence when Griphook burst into his quarters carrying the parchment that bore the distinctive seal of Scribulus writing implements. The goblin's expression was grimmer than Harry had ever seen. "Lord Potter, we have a problem." Harry took the letter and read quickly. The elegant handwriting that had been so confident during their first meeting now shook with obvious distress. Lord Potter. "I write to inform you of disturbing developments regarding our shop in Diagon Alley. This morning, we discovered that several of our major suppliers have mysteriously terminated their contracts, citing changing business relationships and new priorities. Our Edinburgh location has been subjected to unexpected ministry inspections, questioning our licensing compliance, and 3 of our most skilled artisans have received lucrative job offers from competitors, offers contingent on their immediate departure from our employ." I fear these developments are not coincidental, but rather retaliation for our family's public association with Potter interests. I write not to complain, but to seek guidance on how to proceed. Your faithful servant, Reginald Scribulus. Harry set down the letter and looked at Griphook. This is because of what I did yesterday, isn't it? Almost certainly. Your political success threatened certain interests, and they are responding by attacking your supporters and business relationships. Griphook's jaw was tight with anger. It's a classic tactic. Punish those who align with you to discourage others from doing the same. How many other businesses are affected? We're still gathering information, but preliminary reports suggest at least 6 Potter-associated enterprises are facing similar pressure. Suppliers withdrawing, regulatory harassment, attempts to poach key employees. Harry felt a sick weight settle in his stomach. In his focus on outmaneuvering political opponents, he hadn't fully considered how his actions might affect the hundreds of ordinary magical people whose livelihoods depended on Potter family businesses. "This is my fault," he said, quietly. "No, Lord Potter. This is the inevitable result of challenging entrenched power structures. Your enemies are demonstrating their willingness to hurt innocent people to maintain their influence, which makes it my responsibility to protect those people." The morning brought a parade of worried business managers and frightened employees seeking guidance and reassurance. Harry found himself in the uncomfortable position of making decisions that would affect families he had never met, people whose only crime was working for businesses connected to the Potter family. "The suppliers who withdrew from our contracts," explained Marcus Clearwater, who managed Potter family investments in magical transportation, "they've been replaced by companies with known connections to the Malfoy business network. Our costs have increased by 30% overnight." "And if we refuse the new contracts?" Harry asked. "We lose access to essential materials, and our operations grind to a halt. Dozens of employees lose their jobs." Edmund Scribulus, who had been coordinating Potter business interests since Harry's emergence, spread a map of magical Britain across the conference table. "The pattern is clear. Systematic economic warfare designed to demonstrate the cost of opposing established interests." Harry studied the map, which showed Potter-connected businesses marked in blue and their attackers' interests marked in red. The coordination was obvious and troubling. "They're not just trying to hurt our businesses," Harry realized. "They're sending a message to other families who might consider allying with us." "Exactly. See what happens to Potter supporters? This could happen to your businesses too." Lady Bones arrived that afternoon with intelligence from her contacts in magical law enforcement. Her expression was troubled as she settled into the chair across from Harry's desk. "The coordination is more extensive than we initially realized," she reported. "Ministry departments that have never cooperated before are suddenly working together to create regulatory problems for Potter-connected enterprises. Licensing delays, inspection harassment, sudden changes in compliance requirements. Can you stop it through official channels? Some of it, perhaps. But the people orchestrating this are careful to operate within legal bounds. Technically, they're not breaking any laws, just using the system's inherent bureaucracy as a weapon." Harry was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "How many people are we talking about? How many families depend on Potter businesses for their income?" Edmund Scribulus consulted his ledgers. "Directly employed, approximately 400 families across Britain. Indirectly affected through suppliers, contractors, and related services? Perhaps 2,000. The weight of those numbers was staggering. Harry had known intellectually that his family's wealth carried responsibilities, but he was only now beginning to understand what that meant in human terms. His political maneuvering had put food on tables and roofs over heads at risk. "I need to fix this," he said finally. "How?" Lady Bones asked gently. "You could capitulate, withdraw from political involvement, accept that others will make decisions about your inheritance. That might convince them to ease the pressure on your business interests." "No." Harry's voice was firm. "That would just teach them that economic blackmail works. The next time anyone challenges their authority, they'll use the same tactics. Then what do you propose? Harry stood and walked to the window overlooking Gringotts' main hall. Below, he could see the usual bustle of magical banking, people conducting ordinary business in what seemed like a safe, predictable world. But he was learning that safety and predictability were illusions that depended on the forbearance of those with power. "We fight back," he said, "but carefully, strategically." The strategy session that followed lasted 6 hours and involved every member of Harry's informal advisory council. Together, they developed a multi-pronged response that addressed both immediate threats and long-term vulnerability. First, we document everything, Harry decided. Every terminated contract, every suspicious inspection, every regulatory delay. We build a legal record that demonstrates the coordinated nature of these attacks. "For what purpose?" Augusta Longbottom asked. "Evidence for future political use. When the time comes to expose this economic warfare, we'll have proof of who was responsible and how they operated." "Second," Edmund Scribulus added, consulting notes from their discussion, "we provide emergency financial support to affected businesses and employees, low-interest loans, accelerated payments, direct assistance for families facing hardship." "That could cost millions," Ragnok warned. "It will cost millions," Harry replied. "But these people are suffering because they're associated with my family. I won't abandon them to protect my own financial position." "Third," Lady Bones said, "we work to identify and isolate the organizers. This level of coordination requires leadership and resources. If we can identify who's orchestrating these attacks, we can develop targeted responses." As the evening progressed, Harry found himself making decisions that felt enormous and sometimes frightening. He authorized expenditures that would provide immediate relief to affected families, approved intelligence-gathering operations that bordered on espionage, and agreed to defensive measures that would protect Potter interests from future economic attacks. But it was the personal conversation that followed the formal strategy session that truly helped Harry understand what he was becoming. Augusta Longbottom remained after the others had departed, settling back into her chair with the air of someone who had important things to say. "You handled yourself well today," she said, without preamble. "Your father would be proud." "Would he? I put innocent people at risk by getting involved in politics. Maybe I should have stayed hidden until I was older and better prepared." "Child, listen to me carefully." Augusta's voice carried the authority of someone who had navigated decades of magical politics. "Power exists whether you claim it or not. The difference is whether it serves your values or someone else's." "What do you mean?" "The people attacking your businesses today. They've been using their power to shape magical society for years. They've passed laws, influenced policies, and controlled resources according to their vision of how the world should work. Your family's wealth and influence has been part of that system, managed by people who may not share your parents' values." Harry thought about Dumbledore's financial decisions, about charitable donations that served political agendas his parents had never supported. So by staying hidden, I was already letting my power serve other people's purposes. Exactly. The only question was whether you would eventually claim that power and use it responsibly, or allow others to continue wielding it in your name. Augusta leaned forward. "Today, you chose responsibility. It comes with costs, but so does abdication. The people who are suffering because of my actions, how do I live with that? By making sure their suffering serves a larger purpose. By using your power to create a world where such economic warfare is harder to conduct and more costly for those who attempt it." Augusta's smile was sad but proud. "That's what leadership means, Harry. Making decisions that hurt people you care about in service of principles you believe in." That night, as Harry lay in bed reviewing the day's events, he felt the weight of his inheritance more keenly than ever before. It wasn't just money and property and ancient rights. It was responsibility for hundreds of families, obligation to principles his parents had died defending, and the burden of making choices that would affect people he might never meet. But alongside the weight, he felt something else, a growing sense of purpose. The attacks on Potter-connected businesses weren't just about economics, they were about the kind of magical society that would emerge from the ashes of Voldemort's war. His opponents wanted a world where traditional hierarchies remained unchallenged, where blood purity and inherited privilege determined opportunity, where those born into power could use it without accountability. His parents had died fighting that vision. Now it was his turn to take up that fight. As he finally drifted toward sleep, Harry reflected on how much he had changed since his desperate escape from Privet Drive barely 3 weeks earlier. He was no longer the powerless child locked in a cupboard, but he also wasn't the same boy who had walked into Gringotts planning only to reclaim his inheritance. He was becoming Lord Potter in truth, not just in name or wealth, but in understanding of what that title meant, the responsibilities it carried, the principles it represented, and the price it demanded from those who claimed it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions. But tonight, Harry Potter went to sleep, knowing that he had chosen his path deliberately and with full understanding of its costs. He would protect those who depended on him, honor his parents' memory, and build the kind of world they had envisioned, no matter what it cost him personally. That was what it meant to be a Potter. Chapter 12. The Lord of Potterhouse. 3 weeks after his desperate escape from Privet Drive, Harry Potter stood before the great mirror in his Gringotts quarters and barely recognized the boy looking back at him. The physical changes were subtle but significant. Better food and care had filled out his too-thin frame. His hair, no longer butchered by Petunia's kitchen shears, fell naturally around his face. The haunted, fearful expression that had marked his features for as long as he could remember had been replaced by something that looked remarkably like confidence. But the real transformation was deeper than appearance. The boy in the mirror stood straighter, met his own gaze directly, and radiated a quiet authority that would have been unthinkable in the child who had cowered in the cupboard under the stairs. "Ready, Lord Potter?" Griphook asked from the doorway. Today marked the formal conclusion of what history would likely record as Harry's emergence into magical society, though Harry suspected the real story would never appear in any official records. In a few hours he would participate in his first formal ceremony as the Potter heir, officially assuming oversight of his family's business and charitable interests under the watchful eye of magical Britain's most influential families. "As ready as I can be," Harry replied, adjusting the formal robes that bore the Potter family crest. They fit perfectly, tailored specifically for this occasion, and their weight reminded him of the responsibilities he was accepting. The past week had been a whirlwind of final preparations. Harry's response to the economic attacks on Potter-connected businesses had been swift and decisive, demonstrating to magical Britain that the Potter heir would not abandon those who depended on his family's protection. Emergency loans had kept struggling businesses operating, accelerated contracts had provided alternative suppliers, and targeted legal action had put an end to the most egregious regulatory harassment. More importantly, the measured but firm response had sent a clear message. Harry Potter was neither the powerless child his enemies had expected, nor the reckless adolescent they might have hoped to provoke. He was a strategic thinker who understood both the uses and limitations of power, someone who could be negotiated with, but not intimidated. The morning brought a stream of visitors who had come to pay their respects and assess the new political reality. Representatives from dozens of magical families filed through Gringotts' formal reception chambers, offering congratulations, expressing support, and carefully probing the boundaries of Potter influence. But it was the letter that arrived just before the formal ceremony that truly marked the completion of Harry's transformation. "From Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," Griphook announced, carrying the distinctive purple seal that Harry had learned to recognize from his studies of magical institutions, specifically from the office of the headmaster. Harry took the letter with steady hands, noting that his name was written in elegant script as Lord Harry Potter, rather than the simple Harry Potter that would have appeared on a standard Hogwarts letter. A small detail, but one that acknowledged his changed status in magical society. Lord Potter, I trust this letter finds you well and adjusting satisfactorily to your expanded understanding of your place in our world. Your recent activities have been noted with considerable interest by those who concern themselves with the education and development of young witches and wizards. While your formal magical education at Hogwarts will not begin until next September, I believe it would be beneficial for us to meet and discuss how your unique circumstances might best be accommodated within our traditional educational framework. Your extensive private tutoring and political involvement have clearly prepared you for challenges that most students do not face until well after graduation. I would be honored to welcome you to Hogwarts at your earliest convenience for a preliminary consultation regarding your educational needs and the special considerations that may be required given your family's renewed active role in magical society. With respect and anticipation, Albus Percival, Wulfric Brian Dumbledore Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the letter twice, parsing the careful language that managed to be both respectful and subtly controlling. Dumbledore was clearly attempting to establish his authority over Harry's education, while acknowledging the political realities that made direct confrontation inadvisable. He's trying to regain the initiative, Harry observed, showing the letter to Griphook. Indeed, by framing your education as something that requires his special guidance, he positions himself as the expert who can help you navigate your unique circumstances. And if I agree to meet with him privately at Hogwarts, I'm essentially acknowledging his authority over my educational decisions. Precisely. It would be a subtle but significant political victory for him. Harry set down the letter and walked to the window overlooking Diagon Alley. Below, he could see the usual bustle of magical commerce, but now he understood the complex web of relationships and obligations that connected every shopkeeper, customer, and business transaction. His family's influence touched virtually every aspect of that world, and his decisions would continue to ripple through magical society for years to come. I need to respond carefully, he said finally. I can't ignore him. That would be seen as disrespectful to Hogwarts as an institution, but I also can't allow him to dictate the terms of our relationship. The response he crafted with his advisors was a masterpiece of diplomatic maneuvering. Headmaster Dumbledore, thank you for your thoughtful letter and generous offer. I share your interest in ensuring that my formal magical education serves both my personal development and my family's traditional obligations to the magical community. Given the complexity of the considerations involved, I believe such discussions would benefit from the participation of my advisors and those families who have supported my transition into active involvement in magical affairs. I would be delighted to arrange a formal meeting at a mutually convenient time and location with appropriate representation for all interested parties. I look forward to productive conversations about how Hogwarts and the Potter family can continue their centuries-long partnership in service of magical education and social progress. Respectfully, Harry James Potter, Lord of the House of Potter. The formal ceremony that afternoon took place in Gringotts' most ancient and prestigious chamber, a hall carved from living stone that had witnessed 8 centuries of goblin-wizard cooperation. Representatives from every major magical family in Britain attended, along with senior ministry officials, business leaders, and political figures who understood the significance of what was occurring. At its heart, the ceremony was simple. Harry formally accepted oversight of Potter family interests and obligations, swearing ancient oaths that bound him to use his inheritance in service of magical Britain's welfare. But the simplicity was deceptive. These were the same oaths that had been sworn by centuries of Potter lords, the same commitments that had made his family one of the pillars of magical society. Do you, Harry James Potter, heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, accept the responsibilities and obligations that have been passed down through 30 generations of your line?" Ragnar's voice echoed through the chamber, carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. "I do so accept them," Harry replied, his voice steady and clear. "Do you swear to use the power and resources of your inheritance in service of the magical community's welfare, to protect those who depend upon Potter family leadership, and to honor the principles for which your ancestors lived and died?" "I so swear." The oaths continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from business ethics to charitable obligations to the protection of magical creatures and the promotion of educational opportunity. With each commitment, Harry felt the weight of his inheritance settling more firmly on his shoulders, but also felt a growing sense of rightness about the path he had chosen. When the ceremony concluded, he was no longer simply Harry Potter, the boy who had survived Voldemort's killing curse. He was Lord Potter in truth, acknowledged by magical society as the legitimate heir to one of its most influential families, and bound by sacred oaths to use that influence responsibly. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, but Harry found himself stepping away from the festivities to spend quiet time with those who had made his transformation possible. "Your parents would be proud," Lady Bones said, as they stood together in a private alcove overlooking the main celebration. "James and Lily fought for the same principles you've committed yourself to defending. I hope I can live up to their example." "You already have. The past 3 weeks have shown magical Britain that the Potter family's values didn't die with your parents, that their vision for a just and equitable magical society has found a new champion." Lord Longbottom approached with Augusta, both wearing expressions of satisfaction and anticipation. "The real work begins now," Lord Longbottom observed. "Formal oaths are one thing. Living up to them year after year, making the difficult decisions, staying true to your principles when compromise would be easier. That's the true test of leadership." "I understand," Harry said, "and I'm grateful to have allies who will help me meet that test." "You'll need them," Augusta added. "Your success these past weeks has made you powerful, but it's also made you a target. There will be those who test your resolve, who try to corrupt your principles, who seek to use your influence for their own purposes." "Including Professor Dumbledore?" "Especially Professor Dumbledore," she replied grimly. "He's a complex man with noble intentions, but he's grown accustomed to being the most powerful wizard in magical Britain. Your emergence changes that dynamic in ways he may find difficult to accept." As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Harry found himself alone with Griphook in the great chamber where it had all begun. The marble floors that had once seemed impossibly grand now felt familiar, the carved columns and floating lights as comfortable as any home he had ever known. "So," Griphook said, settling into one of the chairs that had been arranged for the ceremony. "What now, Lord Potter?" Harry considered the question carefully. In 3 weeks, he had gone from powerless victim to influential political figure, from ignorant child to strategic thinker, from isolated orphan to leader of a growing coalition of allies. But the transformation was far from complete. "Now I prepare for the long game," he said finally. "Dumbledore will continue trying to manage and control me, but from a much weaker position than he's enjoyed for the past 9 years. The families who opposed my parents will test my resolve and look for weaknesses. The magical community will expect me to solve problems and honor commitments that I'm still learning to understand." "And your response to these challenges?" "I'll meet them as a Potter should, with strategic thinking, principled action, and genuine concern for the welfare of those who depend on my family's leadership." Harry smiled, and for the first time since his transformation began, it was the confident smile of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. "I'll continue my education, expand my network of allies, and use Potter resources to create the kind of magical society my parents envisioned." a society where blood status matters less than character, where merit is rewarded regardless of birth, where those with power accept responsibility for protecting those without it. Exactly. As Harry prepared for sleep that night, his last night in the Gringotts quarters that had sheltered his transformation, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. 3 weeks ago, he had been a terrified child locked in a cupboard, believing himself to be worthless and powerless. Tonight, he was Lord Potter, acknowledged leader of one of magical Britain's most influential families, bound by sacred oaths to use his inheritance in service of justice and progress. The boy who had once cowered before Vernon's fists had learned to negotiate with ministers of magic and hold his ground against some of the most powerful families in magical society. The child who had been told he was a burden and a freak had discovered that he was heir to 8 centuries of accumulated wisdom, wealth, and responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, the isolated orphan who had never known genuine affection or support had found himself surrounded by allies who believed in his potential and were committed to helping him succeed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. His relationship with Dumbledore remained unresolved. His political opponents would undoubtedly continue testing his strength and resolve, and the weight of his responsibilities would only grow as he learned more about what it truly meant to lead the Potter family. But tonight, as Harry Potter drifted toward sleep in the chambers that had witnessed his transformation from victim to leader, he felt something he had never experienced before. Absolute certainty that he belonged exactly where he was, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The Lord of Potter House was ready for whatever came next.